Hey, all you beautiful Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the ETHICSVERSE, welcome to our first ever ETHICSVERSE MBA. Round of applause for yourselves. You guys are all going to get MBAs today. So today we're going to be talking about calculating and tracking and articulating the return on integrity. This is something that a lot of us struggle with. And so buckle up. You are going to absolutely love today's session. It's an elongated session. We're going to be going 3 hours. So let's get those emoji explodies going because I'm here by myself today, all right? So let me go through a couple of announcements and we're going to dive right in. I'm going to be going fast because we got so much stuff to cover. So you're going to be, all the ETHICSVERSE members are going to get these slides. And I guarantee you, these are going to be some slides you're going to want to print out and keep in a binder. All right. The book library, the podcast library, all that stuff is available on your console. You'll see that we've made some changes there. So go ahead and check that out. And if you want to go old school with the QR code, go ahead and take this picture and check it out. I have been doing a podcast series with the one and only Tom Fox talking about AI. I want to show a little clip for you. If you have not checked this out, I would really encourage you to do it. He wrote a really great book about how we can leverage AI in our programs. And, I get to talk to him about that on this podcast. So check out this little clip. This is going to sound maybe a little counterintuitive, but I feel like the power in it, there's two layers to the power in it. Like the base layer is like the extent to which we're actually able to predict something. And that's fine and good. The quality of the predictive analytics is going to vary depending on ultimately like the R score, the true correlation between the variables in the multivariate equation that you might be building. I think the second layer of what it allows you to do is it allows you to really speak the language of the business a lot more and show up like a business person. Like every other department is trying to do that same thing. Sales teams are doing their commits for an entire quarter. CFO is, like I said, building a budget for the entire year. The CEO is going on to an analyst call and they are predicting what's going to happen over the next quarter and what earnings are supposed to be. So when we can show up and use that same kind of muscle, I guess. Tune in to find out what else I said there in that sentence. Okay, we're giving away 5 of my new favorite book, The Art of Ideation from Hema and Ashley. If you don't have this book, then you need to participate today or just hop on Amazon and check it out. So 5 of those are coming, and we're going to also give 5 away in the second session. In the second session, which is going to be 2 hours long, where we're diving into pulling all these concepts that we're talking about in the first session together. The one and only Andrew McBride, founder and CEO of Integrity Bridge, is going to be joining us. Andrew is a friend of the show, friend of the family, super smart. He won a great award a year ago for Program of the Year. And he also wrote this really cool article. So if you don't follow Integrity Bridge, you should go on LinkedIn right now. Follow Andrew, follow Integrity Bridge, and add a new tab for this really cool article he wrote about using generative AI, a bunch of use cases for ethics and compliance. I think you're really going to love it. Speaking of, I think you're going to love it. I get so passionate about this space because we're really at this inflection point. And in order for us to take advantage of what this next chapter can be in each of our own businesses, we need tools that really work for us. So we have this promotion that we're extending through Q2. If you're coming from Conversant or you're coming from Navex or you're coming from OneTrust or any of these legacy providers, SAI 360, you get up to 15% off of your current bill and a tool set that is updated, flexible, and that can really cut out about half of your time if you look at our benchmark report. We also have a really cool a feature that I'm going to share with you right now as well. So there's a button on the console to book a demo. If you'd like to book a demo and see what's out there, and if your contract's not up for 18 months or a year, it's worth kind of checking it out right now because we can give you up to a year free. We're trying to really equip folks in this space to make the impact that is available. So check out this cool little feature.
Okay, risk assessment season, let's get started. So I'm going to need Google Forms, spreadsheets, emails, calendar.
Introducing Ethico's new risk assessment module, your one-stop solution for managing organizational risk. Our intuitive platform streamlines the entire risk assessment lifecycle. Create customized assessments with our drag-and-drop interface, distribute assessments with secure magic links, and boost completion rates with automated reminders and real-time monitoring. Transform raw data into actionable insights with dynamic heat maps and visual risk matrices. Drill down into critical risk areas requiring immediate attention across your organization. The new risk assessment module for MySIM. Reach out to your client success manager to learn more.
Cool, huh? So we've been so informed with all these EthicsVerse episodes about risk assessments and so forth. We wanted to put a flexible tool at your fingertips so that you can get a handle on risks. So if you're interested in checking that out, you should be, and hit up that demo or hit up your client success manager, and we'd be happy to show that to you. Okay, I'm Nick. How's it going? Andrew McBride is going to be joining us in about an hour. Let's just dive right in. There's a button on the console for you to download the toolkit as well. All the stuff that we're going to be covering today, in addition to the slides. I don't know if the slides are on there or not, but those will be sent around. All those tools, there's a couple of white papers and a couple of cool resources there. So go ahead and download that. You're going to want to study that. Or at least have that available. All right, so let's dive in. So what are we talking about today? We are talking about going from cost center to growth engine. How do we make the business case for ethics and compliance? And how do you get an EthicsVerse MBA? Well, stay tuned and you're going to get it. All right. So I want to start off with a little story. I was walking through the halls of what would become our next acquisition target. I used to be in private equity, and I was like, I wasn't even 30 yet. I was the youngest person on the deal team, and my job was to do the due diligence that would make or break this investment of over $50 million in this company. And the numbers in this company were too good to be true. The rest of the industry benchmarks were kind of 8 to 12% margins. This company was generating 18%. The revenue growth was double. Employee turnover was non-existent in an industry where bleeding talent was normal. But as I was walking through the halls and I spent those couple of weeks doing diligence on site, I noticed something that wasn't showing up in the spreadsheet. It was that everyone was smiling, and it was not the cold smiles that the cold corporate smiles that you get. It felt really warm in that business and at that plant. I watched the senior manager stop and pick up some trash in the hallway. I was in the bathroom and I saw a plant worker wiping down the counters with like the care that you would, use at your own home. And I was at lunch with a friend or, one of my colleagues on the deal team. And I said, man, this place really feels different. Have you seen how engaged everyone seems? And he said, yeah, it's probably just good management. The numbers kind of speak for themselves. And they did. The company was an ESOP. It was a employee-owned company. And we were about to take that transformed these 400 plus people that worked at this plant into actual owners. We were going to pull them into a private situation. We were going to take this ESOP private. And as I started kind of thinking through it and I spent more time there, I really started to get a little bit of a knot in my stomach. So 3 weeks later, or a couple weeks later, we were at the, we were in the mahogany room, for investment committee. And the managing director, who was one of the world's great jerks, learned a lot from him. But he was known for his razor sharp intellect, his cutting tongue, and he's at the head of the table. And he was a real champion of this deal. He wanted to do this deal, and he did not, he wanted to like push this through in investment committee. So I raised my hand and I said, this presents a great opportunity for us. They have great margins, great growth trajectory, but I have concerns about their ability to maintain these metrics post-acquisition. And like the whole room went silent. So he sits back and he says, go on. And I said, well, I think a disproportionate amount of their performance is tied to the fact that everyone is an owner. And after this conversion, they're going to be converted into regular employees. And he said, how do you suppose we quantify this feeling? And I said, well, I don't know. It's a cultural, and he cut me off. And, he said, culture. He goes, where does culture show up on the P&L? What line item captures what you're talking about? How do you incorporate the count of smiles that you're seeing in the hallways into the financial model? And I felt myself, I really felt myself shrinking. This is how I felt at that moment. And I said, well, I don't know how to quantify it. And he says, I said, it might be difficult to quantify. And he goes, difficult, it's irrelevant. These people are going to have jobs. They're going to have benefits. They're going to have salaries. Are you suggesting we pay $50 million for good vibes? And the questions kind of kept coming, and I felt, the dunce in the corner, and so that was like a seminal event in my life, because this thing that I saw firsthand, that I knew in my gut was going to be an issue, proved to be an issue within 2 quarters. So at, like the second board meeting after we closed the transaction and we took this ESOP private, all these margins ended up kind of collapsing down into those industry averages. And, I felt like, okay, this thing that I saw is a real thing, even though I can't sort of quantify it at the moment. that really kicked me off on this journey to try to figure out how do we, what is the true effect of an ethical culture on an organization, and how do we start to kind of quantify that so those who don't see it or don't feel it can start to kind of get those light bulbs turned on. So that's really what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be diving through this concept of, what is the return on integrity and how do we best convey that to folks? So for session one, here is our agenda. We're going to talk about the problem a little bit. We're going to talk about a couple of persuasion basics, like basic frameworks for persuasion. Then we're going to spend some time talking about mindset, because mindset is critical to persuade. If we're transferring any, selling is a transfer of emotion. Guess what? Welcome to MBA. We're all in sales. So whether you carry a quota or you're just pushing ideas, we are all salespeople. And if we don't have the right mindset behind the ideas we're trying to push, the odds of us transferring the right emotion is going to be zero. Then we're going to dive into a recipe book, and then we're going to do a couple of mini case studies. In the second session, you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be a 2-hour session with, again, Andrew McBride joining us. We're going to run through quickly what we talked about in this section, and then we're going to dive into a bunch of calculations. Then we're going to dive into a bunch of rhetorical frameworks, and then we're going to pull it all together. And if we have some time, we're going to talk about a little bonus section with some framing tenets that are going to make you a lot more persuasive to kind of put some, put some garnish on the plate. Okay, so let's dive in. Like I said, we're gonna be going fast. Already up to 1,000 emojis, so I'm very happy about that. So what's the problem? So the problem is that our lives are always more difficult when others don't recognize our worth. Why are we bad at conveying our worth within the organization? Well, it's a bunch of things. We sometimes have a professional background gap. Some of us have not lived in Excel. We haven't looked at financial models our entire lives. We haven't gone door to door selling satellite dishes or pest control or anything like that. A lot of the stuff, like in that story I told, a lot of the stuff is also hard to quantify. It's hard to measure. When we kick an initiative off, sometimes it takes time for that wave to wash across the shore. So there's this like delayed value realization that happens. And sometimes we have this like defensive positioning. When we start to believe that we're a cost center, we start to kind of act like a cost center. So it's harder for us to articulate and really push our ideas forward when we think the person, our adversary. When I say adversary today, that's the person on the other side of the table that we're trying to persuade. When we think we're a cost center, or when we believe that our adversary is not going to listen to us, well, then the odds of them listening to us start to kind of fall through the floor. I talked a little bit about that attribution difficulty. It's hard to kind of, with precision, tie out each kind of point of the return to the efforts that we're placing. And, again, there's this persuasion skills gap. So we're going to attack all these things today. And you are going to leave this session today feeling much more equipped for the next time you need to have one of these conversations with leadership or with a counterpart or with the CFO or with the board. We need to come into these conversations with a sword, not a pool noodle, so that we can do battle and speak the language of business. As I was saying in that clip, the more we can show up like a business person, the better. So let's kind of zoom out, big picture. This is your first MBA here, by the way, okay? So why does a company exist? Well, what do you think? Well, it exists to produce goods and services that people want or need in order to, what do we think this is going to say? Generate profits for owners. Companies exist to generate returns for owners, and they do that by providing goods and services that the market needs. So this is the goal. For 1,000 bonus points, jump into the chat and let me know. There's some hints on this graph. Who is this company? Okay. So this is the goal. People want to start a business in order to grow that business and to make that a substantial organization. So what that graph just showed you is a stock price, which is kind of a proxy for enterprise value. Enterprise value is the value of the whole organization. Enterprise value increases based on what you're seeing on the screen right now. So when revenue goes up or expenses go down, EBITDA, which is cash flow, essentially, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Just say EBITDA, then it sounds like you know what you're talking about. Cash flow goes up. All these things end up influencing the total enterprise value. That EBITDA is always multiplied by some kind of multiple. So if you think about two houses built right next door to each other, same floor plan, same everything, built in the same year, but one has been updated. They got the new granite countertops, or not granite, quartz countertops, bathrooms have been updated, and this one still has the shag carpet and the avocado appliances. Which one is going to trade for more if they both go on the market? Well, obviously this one. How is that going to show up? They got the same square footage. So this one is going to show up with a higher price per square foot. So that price per square foot in real estate is a corollary for the multiple that drives enterprise value of an organization. And so when we, in these guardian positions, whether it's legal or it's ethics and compliance or it's HR, are professionalizing the business and improving the business, that's akin to redoing the kitchen. That's akin to, redoing the master bath. As we professionalize the business, the multiple expands because we've effectively de-risked the organization, and all that falls down to the bottom line, that is enterprise value. So what do they care about? They being leadership, owners, the board. They care about revenue growth. They care about revenue per client. They care about customer satisfaction and customer retention rate. So which of these, there's three stocks on here. Oh yeah, back to that other green one. That was Apple. So round of applause, 1,000 points if you guessed Apple. Which of these three investments would you choose? Okay. If you have eyes, you of course would jump to the blue one, right? Because the blue one is outperforming the green and the purple one. How about on this graph? Which of these two which of these two stocks would you like to invest in, the black one or the green one? Well, again, if you have eyes, you can see that the green one is outperforming the black one in virtually every environment. And so what is that green line? Well, that green line is a picture of the world's most ethical companies. That's a great proxy. That's a great aggregation that Ethisphere does every single year. And there's a bunch of you on this call today. They aggregate all the stock prices for the world's most ethical companies, and they compare it to the rest of the market. And what you'll see is that over time, up markets, down markets, recessions, expansions, whatever, that this green line is always over the black line. So we're going to keep coming back to this today because this should be our foundation. This should be our ultimate proof point that the aggregation of all these efforts and all these initiatives and all these things that we do to improve our company, they do in aggregate translate into better stock performance, which is that main bottom line of what they care about. Today, we're going to talk about trying to deconstruct that premium, take pieces of that premium and incorporate that in our talk track or in our persuasion path with our adversaries so that they can get a better picture and a better view of how the things we are doing translate into the things that they care most about. That's going to be kind of the theme for today. So the things that they care about, which lead to this higher stock price, are revenue growth, customer satisfaction, profit per client. Okay. What do we care about? What are we managing on a day-to-day basis? Well, if you're in HR or you're in ethics and compliance, these are some of the things that you're probably looking at and managing and you're incorporating in your board reports. What's our completion rate on training? How many cases did we get last year? What's our litigation expense? What are our code of conduct violations? How many interactions are we getting with our code of conduct? So our job is really to tie our KPIs at the micro level to these macro KPIs that our adversaries or our leaders care most about. This is the easiest path to shift from, bumper sticker on the car to headlights on the car, to, from being apart from the business to being a part of the business. We have to show up like business people. And the better we are at connecting what we're doing to this broader vision and this broader company strategy, the more impact and the more influence we're going to be able to have. So we are focused on these first order KPIs, what I call them, department level KPIs. And then we have these third order KPIs that leadership cares most about. So we got to make this connection. We got to connect what we're doing, like I say, to what everybody else cares about. And you need to break this mentality, if you have it, about cost center, profit center. This is not something that's etched in stone. Profit center is in the eye of the beholder. So when we can show up in the right way, we can do a lot to shift that perspective that others may have of us or others may have of our function to elevate from the kiddie table to the grown folks table where strategy is discussed and so forth. So the key is to credibly, continually connect our local KPIs to those company level KPIs. So let's go back to 7th grade. Maybe 6th grade if you were smart, and talk a little bit about geometry, because this is going to be kind of a metaphor for what we're trying to do today and what we're trying to achieve. So a point is what? A point is something without length or width or anything. It's just a location with 0 dimension, having some position in time or space or whatever. If we have 2 points, now we have something with width or length, but no width, right? 2 points make a line. If we add another point, what do we get? Now we have a shape. We have something with length and width, but no depth, okay? So 3 points make a plane. And then finally, if we add a 4th point, now what do we have? Now we have a 3-dimensional object. We have a 3D shape with length, width, and height. And so to the extent that we are showing up with, one-dimensional or two-dimensional, we want to show some more form, some more dimensionality to our program so that folks can start to see that there's a lot more to the initiatives we're doing. Look, we're not showing up in the top line, we're not showing up in sales, but we're showing up in the health of the organization. And when they can start to see the form, the added dimensionality of our program, we start to get a lot of resources and endorsement and so forth unlocked. Okay, so let's dive into persuasion basics. Okay, so is this a nice picture? Would you like this hanging on your wall? Is this a cool picture? This looks like a picture of a freaking trash can and a couple of taxis. Okay. How about this picture? You like this picture? This is great. Imagine this on a big wall or a big mural. Well, guess what? This is the same picture, because if you zoom in on that red arrow, you're going to see that trash can. And so what we're really talking about today is framing. If somebody is not looking at the picture correctly, it's on us to adjust that frame or help them to zoom out and see the bigger picture of what we're doing. It's incumbent on us as high agency individuals to make that happen. So if people are viewing you like this, it's on you to make sure that they can see the whole, that they have the right vantage point and can see the whole picture. So we talk a lot about ROI. Everybody, all of our counterparts in all these different departments, this is the language of business. This denominates every investment into a comparable currency, so to speak. And because of those, these attribution issues and the difficulty, the delayed response, all those kinds of things, we sometimes don't really grab a hold of ROI and use it the way that we should. So math can be intimidating. Trying to quantify all these things, gain access to these different data pools, all that stuff can be difficult. But I want you to start to think about ROI merely as a tool for persuasion. It's just what we're going to get divided by what it's going to take to get it. Okay. So let's also talk about this critical element. Once I show this to you, you're going to see this everywhere. Okay. So sorry to ruin cologne commercials for you, but the motivation triad depicts the factors that drive all of our behaviors, all of our purchases, the clothes you're wearing, the house you have, the job you have. All of these things are some confluence of these 3 points. So we as human beings are wired to avoid pain. We're wired to conserve energy, right? We want to maintain resources or reduce our resource load wherever possible. And we're also drawn to experiences that give us pleasure, whether that's satisfaction, reward, more money, whatever. So we, in our guardian positions, ethics and compliance, HR, et cetera, we tend to focus on only one of these points. We tend to overly focus on pain avoidance. And so that can become a pitfall. But energy conservation benefits and pleasure-seeking opportunities, when they're incorporated, that adds a lot more dimensionality to our initiative. And it helps to really frame out in a much better way what the true impact can be. And it skyrockets the odds that what we're talking about is going to resonate with our adversary or adversaries if we're talking to a group. Also, when we are interacting with our adversaries or leadership, and we are looking for resources, we need to think about this as a sales presentation. We need to think about this as we're making an argument. And so if we're making an argument, we need to understand what it takes to make a good argument. And so my good friend Aristotle came up with this great rhetorical triangle. And again, we in these guardian positions tend to oversample or overly focus on one of these points. 1,000 points to anyone who can drop what the answer is in the chat. Yep, 1,000 points. Logos, we tend to lean with logic. And so obviously logic is important. Each of these points is important. But when we can incorporate more ethos, more credibility to our conversation, when we can incorporate more pathos, more emotional appeals, whether that's through storytelling or anecdotes or whatever, or just bringing our own passion to the conversation, we can now add a lot more dimensionality and again, increase the odds of resonating. You have to believe every lock can be picked, and it's on us to figure out how to pick that lock. If we continue to just, jam the same key that's not fitting in the lock-in, we can't be puzzled with ourselves to say, like, why is this door not opening? It's not opening because we're not, I'm not a locksmith, but we're not like, twisting the tumbler and popping those pins out. So logic, super critical, of course. But you have to recognize that logic makes you think and emotion makes you act. If we are not incorporating emotion and we're not building credibility for ourselves in our persuasion path, then the odds of them taking the action we want them to take is way lower. Okay, so I also want you to remember here that selling is a transfer of emotion. Okay, write this down. Logic makes you think, emotion makes you act. But selling is a transfer of emotion, and that emotion needs to be certainty. So if you are certain of your initiative or certain for the need of, your need of this item or this initiative or this tool, that does a lot to help build that emotional transfer that's necessary to break the inertia and to overcome this fear that people have of making the wrong decision. But you can't do any of this stuff if you don't have trust. And so I love this trust equation because it really does articulate the hack for building trust fast. So in your numerator, again, you're in MBA school here, okay? So in your numerator, we have three different variables. We have credibility, we have reliability, and authenticity, or intimacy, call it. So when we can push those three items up, our trust begins to build. But the biggest driver of trust is what's in the denominator, and that's self-focus. So when we can drive down our self-focus, when we're not trying to jam our agenda, but instead we're others focused, and we can try to understand the position that our counterpart is in or that our adversary is in or what they care most about, we can build trust implicitly, organically, in a much faster way. So keep in mind that most of us in our positions, we're high conscientious people. We have a high degree of reliability. This numerator kind of takes care of itself. And the best way that we can start to really drive this trust forward is really collapsing down our self-focus and really being a servant to the organization. It's crazy how when you're a servant, so many things become unlocked for us. Okay, so like I said, selling is a transfer of emotion, and that emotion should be certainty. So if you are certain, you need to exude that certainty because like you're in your position for a reason. Like you have a unique skill set, you have a unique background, you have something that the company needs, even if they don't know that they need it. And so that certainty should really drive you to turn down the volume on that negative self-talk, turn down the volume on that, imposter syndrome that every human being on earth has when they're doing something new and doing something scary, and really lean into that confidence that you have in you. Like you have certainty in you. You have to push that out into the conversation. Okay, let's dive into mindset now, okay? So our mindset is super critical. So does an ethical culture really add value to an organization? I'm gonna run through a bunch of questions that seem to be recurring questions that end up kind of like deteriorating our mindset and end up creating headwinds for us to be more effective and really drive the change that we're trying to drive forward. So look, there's two states of reality. It's one or the other. This is a truly binary thing. Either the things that we do, the things that we care about, the initiatives that we're pushing matter, or they don't matter. And so if you are in an organization where, or you have a boss like I told you about in my intro story, who doesn't see any value in it, and you do see value in it, one of you is right. You're not both right, and you're not both wrong. So our job is to, I believe that we're right. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it firsthand in that story. I've seen it firsthand in my own organization that, focusing on building a culture of integrity where people feel belonging and people feel like their voice can be heard doesn't mean that it's always going to be right and there's never going to be storm clouds, but that authentic desire to create that kind of employee experience leads to superior results on every single metric. So to the extent where, to the extent that your leaders are kind of in the dark and you're in the light, you can either kind of cross your fingers and just kind of play the waiting game until, enough people that are like-minded to you kind of, bubble up to positions of leadership. That could be a long time. That's a kind of sitting in the back seat of the car type of a situation. So that's one option. The other option is to, grab the steering wheel of your life and grab the steering wheel of your career, exhibit your high agency, and help them to see the impact of what we're doing. Okay. Also recognize that, look, this is 4 different graphs. Every single year that Ethisphere puts this thing out, this green line's always over the black line. This is always true. And it's always going to be true because if you just boil it down and think about it, today's workforce cares about a place, or they care about putting their gifts to work in an organization that they can be proud to say they work at. The cost of changing jobs is lower than it's ever been. Labor mobility is higher than it's ever been. So the more this ends up being such a magnet for talent, and it shows up in these stock prices. So at the end of the day, we have to always be able to come back to this tenet, this foundation, this truth, and know that this is always true and that ethical companies always perform better. What about accuracy? I talked about this in the intro. What about accuracy? This can be kind of paralyzing because we're high conscientious. We're not the folks to get out over our skis and just sort of say things. And this inability to be super accurate sometimes paralyzes us and prevents us from incorporating these third order impacts that really do move the needle. So how do we start to think about this? Well, we have to start to attack our accuracy bias. We can't approach things like this like it's brain surgery. Look, brain surgery, you can't sneeze, okay? You can't have any little errors because then you're gonna have a patient in a vegetative state on the table. This is not like that. This is a lot more like horseshoes and hand grenades. We just have to get kind of close. And so that means we have to be comfortable with making estimates. We have to be comfortable being conservative with those estimates. And we have to be able to talk about things in ranges. We also have to remember that nobody has a crystal ball. Your organization or the private equity fund that owns you, they have some kind of an M&A team, and they're looking for acquisitions, and they're looking for companies to buy to fold into the platform. Guess what? None of those people have crystal balls. So what are they doing? They're employing, expected value thinking. They're trying to come up with conservative, good estimates that will kind of lead to the right answer. And so if any of you have looked at a financial model and you've gone to the 8th tab, you can see that there's just hundreds of like nested assumptions. That's just how it works. That's how these other departments or these other teams do their work and add value. So if we're scared of having those kinds of estimates, or we're scared of talking about things in ranges, well, then we're just kind of like clipping our own wings before we even get out of the nest. So estimating is okay. So I'm talking a little bit about like expected value thinking. I want you to think about this game. A game costs $2 to flip a coin. If you win, you get $10. And if you lose, you win $0, okay? $0. Would you play this game? Well, with expected value thinking, we know that in each case, it costs me $2 to play. Half of the time I'm going to win 10, which is a net of 8. Half of the time I'm going to win 0, which is a net of -2, which 50% of 8 plus 50% of -2 results in a $3 profit. So we would play that game 1,000 times. We would expect to win $3,000. This is a good game to play. We need to be able to think about things in that way. What are the odds of this happening? What are the odds of that happening? If this happens, what outcome am I going to get? If that happens, what outcome am I going to get? And use our expected value thinking. You can chat GPT this if you're not comfortable with it, but it's a very, very simple. You're just multiplying the odds of either of these paths occurring times the outcome of those paths occurring, and adding those things together. This is like how all M&A happens, okay? So we have to think through that and start to understand where are the bounds of these outcomes that we're comfortable with. So I'm really trying to kind of like tear the curtain down so you can see behind it that all of this ROI talk, all of this future casting, all this vision casting, all this kind of stuff that all these forward-looking organizations or departments spend all their time doing, it's not a bunch of alchemy. We're not turning lead into gold. We're just doing a bunch, of basic addition and multiplication. Don't fall into this attribution trap. By our nature, our first order impacts don't show up as first order impacts for the company. They're not showing up directly on the P&L. They're implicit things. And so when we can let go of this attribution trap, we can change our mentality and we can start, quote unquote, taking credit for that premium. Like that premium exists. That green line is always above the black line. How do we grab pieces of that premium and start to incorporate it into our, into the dish we're serving so that it has more flavor profiles, that it's going to be a richer dish, that, what we're talking about is going to add some dimensionality. If you go on a diet and you cut out salads and you start walking 10,000 steps per day, 2 months from now, when you hit your goal weight, you're never going to go back and say, oh, okay, half of it was due to salads and half of it was due to steps. It's a confluence of factors that go into you getting more healthy. That's the way we need to think about the things that we are doing and the things that we're driving, because it all boils down to organizational health. Organizational health is de-risking the organization. That helps to increase the multiple, like I said a few slides back, that drives that enterprise value. So we have to have some surety in this model and in what we're talking about here, and not fall into these biases that we may have, based on the way that we're wired, or based on our personality type. Pardon me. All right. What if what I'm asking for is a lot? Okay, so I'm going to go fast here. It's not a lot. Okay, but let me just prove it to you. So let's say this is your team on the left, or on the, the people is your team and the building is your organization. If we were to boil that down and create a corollary on an individual basis, where the revenue of the organization corresponds to the salary of an individual, and the cost of your team and all the tools that go into your team correspond to something else on a relative basis to this person who, let's say, is making 100K, what is your team cost? What is your, the resources that you're asking for? What do those cost relative to an individual? Is that like buying a house? Is that like buying a new car? Is that like going on an exotic vacation to Bali? Or is it like going out for drinks? These are all very different spends, and your memory of a spend like, across these 4 different examples is going to vary, right? If you bought a house in a given year, you'll probably remember that for a long time. If you go out to dinner once, you're probably not going to remember that for a long time. So if you look here, your program is equivalent to going out for drinks once, okay? That's what it is. So when you're asking for something that seems like a big number to you, because it might be a big number to you relative to your income or something like that, you have to recognize that from the company's perspective, you're just asking them to brush a couple of crumbs off the table. That's all you're asking for. But if you go into these conversations thinking that what you're asking for is like a really big number and you're really kind of sheepish about it, well, guess what? They're going to think it's a big number, and your adversary is going to act as if it's a big number. If you can go into this, and you can use some of the techniques we're going to be talking about a little bit later with the surety, again, that what you're asking for is not a small number. It's what the business needs. And you've been put in this position to make sure that the risks that you're responsible for are extinguished and, your business is more excellent, then that surety is going to translate. When my son is asking to play Fortnite, I can tell whether he's done his homework based on just how he asks. So keep that in mind. How you show up is going to have a big influence on the answer you get. So boiling it down, the answer is, your program is equivalent to getting drinks once, okay? Not a big deal. I would love an Aperol Spritz here. Let's place that order. Okay, let's dive now into the recipe book. I think we're doing pretty good on time here. Okay, the recipe book. So we came up with this framework for these guardian positions, whether it's HR or it's ethics and compliance. And this has been a great framework to help ascertain where our industry is at, where a program is at, or where an aspect of a program is at. So let's run through this real quick. So when ethics first came out, it was all about pain avoidance. It was all about keeping the boss out of jail, keeping the company out of the headlines, all that kind of stuff. It was kind of a necessary evil. This is when a smart person was told by their boss, hey, figure this thing out. We got to do something about this. This is before we had tools and software and titles and so forth. Where most of us find ourselves today is at this 2.0 level. And at this 2.0 level, we, of course, are still concerned about risk, and we're concerned about, regulatory fines and stuff like that. But our focus has shifted, or our scope has expanded to start focusing on efficiency efforts, right? Cost reduction. This is where this moniker of cost center has come up, that has been placed on many of us. We're often in a reactive mode in this case. We're often complaining that we're not being brought in when we should. People aren't following our processes. We're excluded from important meetings, and we're kind of always playing catch up. We're kind of living in that reactive mode. Certain programs and certain leaders are really pushing into this 3.0. And when I'm talking about the next 10 years being way different for our industry than the last 10 years, it's because I believe, a disproportionate number of programs are going to elevate into this 3.0 framework. And the 3.0 framework is really all about effectiveness. It's about profitability expansion. It's when we are viewed as a trusted advisor in the organization, and we're brought in proactively to kind of put out, to do the kind of fire suppression stuff instead of just fighting raging infernos constantly. So when we can, the reason that this matters is because this is really what helps to drive that green line to have that premium up above the black line. So you can look at a particular program or particular aspect of your program. You can look at your program, or you can kind of view our industry just to see where we're at on this curve. The next 10 years is going to be really exciting if we can start to put some of these basic things that all of our counterparts throughout the organization are using on a daily basis into place in our own job, okay? So let's bring this down into the ROI framework. Remember, return on integrity or return on investment, it's kind of the same. Return on investment is merely what we're going to get divided by what it's going to take to get that. And so when we can apply that 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 framework to the ROI, it gives us some clues on where we should kind of start to look and how we can really build a really strong numerator, right? The more we can jack up that numerator relative to the denominator, the higher that ROI goes. And so what you'll see, though, what's really interesting about this, I think, is that this ties directly to the motivation triad. So 1.0 is all about risk measures. Motivation triad is about avoiding pain, right? One of those corners of that triangle is about avoiding pain. 2.0 is all about efficiency measures. This is about energy conservation, right? That's the second point on the triad. And finally, the 3.0, which is where we're trying to ascend to, the real strategic impact, the thing that really drives that business quality and that business out performance, corresponds to the pleasure-seeking stuff. So I want you to start to think about where, this can turn into like a Mad Libs game, where we can really start pulling from different areas in the organization and start really building a multi-dimensional sort of numerator that really helps to encapsulate, or at least gives a nod to, these third order impacts that our initiatives are driving. So if we put our motivation triad / 3.0 framework on a vertical axis, and we put the rhetorical triangle on the horizontal axis, we've now created a persuasion matrix that can also give us some guidance on how we should kind of be communicating these initiatives to our adversary. So in the second section, we're going to be diving into this super deep and cutting this against major personality types. If you were on the Tuesday session last week, we had some folks on talking about presenting to the board. And a big piece of that was understanding what the personality type is of the person, your adversary, of the person you are presenting to. So this persuasion matrix is extremely powerful because it gives you a guide and it gives you some hints on how you want to craft your talk track, how you want to craft your persuasion path, and really kind of increase the odds of resonating with your adversary. Okay, so what makes up this equity premium, right? The green line for the ethical companies is always above the black line, and we know what makes up that premium is a higher total enterprise value. That's that TEV. So if we were to deconstruct that gap between the green line and the black line, all of these third order impacts that we're having are falling into one of these 4 buckets, okay? And look how smart. I love a good acronym. We're talking about adding dimensionality. We're talking about adding form to our program. And look at that. It forms form. Hello. So we're going to be looking for performance, financial performance factors, operational excellence factors, risk reduction factors, and market position factors. And all of these are going to, depending on which rocks you look under, you're going to find different grubs that you can kind of start putting into that numerator. Okay. In the second section, we're going to be diving deep into all of these areas, and and the resource kit has a bunch of these resources here for you to start downloading and start. You can see all of this stuff articulated. It's in a beautiful PDF. So our ethical premium exists in form, okay? Financial, operational, risk, and market factors. So financial stuff, we're talking about lower cost of capital. There was a lot of benefit for strong ESG programs recently from a cost of capital perspective, higher earnings, higher quality of earnings, better capital efficiency. These are some of the financial performance factors that we can start to incorporate. Operational excellence factors. We're talking about employee engagement. We're talking about employee turnover. We're talking about greater innovation capacity. With respect to risk reduction factors, these are the ones that you guys all know easily, right? Lower litigation expense, lower regulatory risk, diminished systemic risk in the organization. When we're comfortable making estimates and speaking in ranges, we can start to pull in, based on benchmarks, based on estimates that we've made, we can start to pull in some of these risk reduction factors and put a dollar amount to them to start showing up like a business person, to start speaking the language of business, which is ROI. And then finally, in the last column, we have market position factors. So customer loyalty. Customer loyalty now is driven by the perceived ethics of an organization more than it's ever been. People will shop at one place or another place based on their perception of the ethical stance of that organization. What about market access benefits? How about price premium capability? Think about Patagonia, high ethics organization, and they charge an absolute premium for their goods, and people are happy to pay it. This is a big one also. Preferential supplier terms. So like I said, in the second section, we're going to be diving into that as well. Okay. How are we doing on time here? Okay. Yeah, we're good. Okay. So we have a couple of mini case studies that are going to kind of start to exhibit some of the things that we're talking about here. Joe, if there's any good questions in the chat, I know I spoke pretty fast, but we have a little bit of extra time here, I think. So if there's any good questions, only send me good ones, please. If there's any good questions, just drop them in the chat and I will respond to them. Okay, so we're gonna dive into a couple of mini case studies that are going to help us to see the application of these quantification principles to build an ROI case, okay? So case study number one is a new case management system. So here's our fact pattern, and then we're going to go through the calculations. And you're going to see how easy this is. And you're going to say, oh my gosh, there's no way this could be this easy. This has always seemed like alchemy to me. Stay tuned, okay? So let's say you're currently spending $25K on your case management and investigation management tool, and a new tool that has better features. Maybe it has some new functionality that can really drive a better investigation process. It's going to cost $5,000 more. It's going to cost $30K. Your current case closure time is 45 days, and based on benchmarks, based on claims that you've been able to verify and substantiate from the new vendor, you think that case closure time is going to drop to 23 days. You currently have a 4-person team with an all-in average compensation of salary, benefits, all that kind of stuff of $70,000. Okay, four people on your team. Okay, so let's start kind of bottom up, or let's start kind of attacking our ROI calculation. Okay, so our total team cost is what? Well, we have 4 people, and they each cost $70K. So that costs $280,000. What is our incremental investment? What is it going to cost for us to get this new platform and to get the benefits of reduced case closure time? Well, we're paying $25 now. The new one's going to cost $30, so that's a $5,000 difference. How can we start to build our numerator in our ROI case? Well, if we're cutting our case closure time in half, that's going to drive a lot of efficiency. So how can we start to think about how do we quantify that efficiency gain? Well, it looks like we're going to save about 50% if we're able to drop our case closure time from, where there's no triage and there's no automated workflows and there's a bunch of manual work down to 23 days. That's about a 50% drop. So it's safe to make an assumption and quantify that efficiency gain by denominating it in total team costs. So most all of the people I've talked to over the last 8 years, as long as I've been in this industry, everybody always has another head or two that they would love to get added to their program. So what this is doing is we're saying, okay, our team is spending 4 people's full time. That this team costs $280K. Now that's going to get cut basically in half. So that 50% is about $140,000. So that's going to be the return. That's how we've quantified this efficiency gain. And our investment is going to be $5,000. So when we calculate our ROI, it's 140 divided by the 5K. That's a 29x ROI. So imagine going to your CFO, who you've been asking for the last 2 years to get some heads added to your team, and say, hey, I got some great news for you. Those 2 heads that I've been asking for the last 2 years, scratch that off your list. Get me off of your naughty list, because I think if I spend $5,000, I'm going to free up 2 heads on my team to drive some of these initiatives that have been important but non-urgent forward. So this is a 2.0 efficiency gain. All right. Let's jump to this next case study. So this is about an employee retaliation or an employee relations retaliation campaign. So here is the fact pattern. It currently costs us $0 because we're not doing anything about retaliation. But you've seen your Glassdoor reviews, you've seen some exit interviews that have kind of shown you that we might have a retaliation problem. Maybe you read the recent study that said, over 50% of people who spoke up face some kind of retribution, and that is driving your turnover rate. So you want to come up with an exit and stay interview campaign. You want to use a vendor for that to increase your participation rate with folks. And you want to drive some awareness forward, an awareness campaign to really kind of attack retaliation head on. You have 2 people on your team that are at 70K that need to spend 1,000 hours over the next year. Quick rule of thumb is there's about 2,000 work hours. If you only work 40 hours a week, there's 2,080 hours per year for any given employee. Okay. So we have 2 people at 70K, and you're going to need 1,000 hours of their time to, administer the campaign, to review all the exit interviews, to interact with the counterparts in different departments to make sure that something is done about the things that you find out there. You have 1,000 employees with an average fully loaded compensation of $60,000, and you have current voluntary turnover of 20%. With historical rates at at 7%. So you've seen a spike in voluntary turnover. It's at 20. It used to be at 7. There's 1,000 people in your there's 1,000 employees in your organization. How do we start to craft our ROI case for this initiative? Well, let's start getting our pencils out and start breaking this down. So what is our total team cost? Well, we have 1,000 hours divided by 2080 times 2, right? Because we have 2 people that have 2080 hours available, and we only need 1,000 of their collective hours. So that's 24% of those 2 people's total time. The total team cost that you're going to dedicate to this is 2 times 70. So that's 2 times 70. So that's $140,000 times this 25% gets you to about $35,000. So we're going to be talking in the next section about this concept of conservatism, which any CPA gets pounded into their head. So to the extent your CFO is a CPA or just probably an accountant, this is a principle that we need to incorporate in our conversations if we're going to resonate with them. So the worst thing we can do is pave over implicit costs that go to this initiative. So we have to incorporate some of this cost in addition to the $80,000 that we're going to spend. This is existing team cost. We need to incorporate an estimate for that cost in our ROI calculation if we're going to overcome, that conservatism radar that any CFO has. Okay. Cost of turnover is what? Well, this is a great metric to start putting your finger on and start kind of getting a handle on. Your cost of turnover is the count of employees times your turnover rate times their salary times whatever that cost of turnover is. So there are estimates that range from 6 months to 2 years of salary depending on level. Again, we want to be conservative here, so let's go below the low end of those ranges. There's a lot of studies out there from Workday and Gallup who have quantified this thing. Again, we want to be able to be conservative and be compelling with the case that we're making. So let's, if it's 50% to 200%, let's go a little bit below the low end of that range. So 1,000 people times 20% voluntary turnover times $60,000 of average salary times 1/3 of that annual salary to account for the onboarding cost, the hiring cost, recruiting, the loss of efficiency as somebody gets up their J curve. Let's just assume that that's 33% of the 60K. The cost of turnover in this fact pattern then equates to about $4 million, $3.96 million. Let's just say, we're never going to go, we can't be conservative if we are conveying that, hey, if we run this anti-retaliation campaign, it's going to be like waving a freaking magic wand, and this 20% within 12 months is going to drop down to our historical average of 7% for voluntary turnover. If I heard that, I would say, get out of my office. If you heard that, you would say, you sound, I don't believe you. Okay, so let's start to quantify what a more reasonable, a more conservative, a more easy to palate assumption might be. Again, we have to think in bets and we have to think in, estimates. We have to be able to estimate this stuff. So if we had a 2% increase or a 2% decrease, right? We're at 20, historically we're at 7. If we were able to drop that just 2%, how much is that worth? Well, let's calculate it. So if we have 1,000 people and now our voluntary turnover is only 18% instead of the 20, we still have 60K average salary and we have 33% as a cost of turnover. That cost of turnover now has dropped to 3.6 million bucks. So what's the difference between the 3.96 and the 3.6? It's about a $400,000 return. So when I'm asking for $80,000 plus another $34,000 in terms of implicit cost of repurposed people on my team, that sounds a lot smaller when I have on top of my ROI equation $400,000. But again, if we're not willing to make some kind of assumption on the impact, the third order impact that's going to influence that P&L, if we're not comfortable incorporating it, well, it just looks like a net new spend of at least $80,000 plus that implicit cost of another $24,000. Does that make sense? Yes, it should. Okay. So what's our total investment? Our total investment is the $80,000 plus that implicit team cost of $34,000. So that's in our denominator, right? That's our cost, or that's our investment. So $114,000 is in our denominator. In our numerator, we just said came up to about $400,000. That generates a 3.5x return. So again, imagine coming to them and saying, hey, I need $80,000 for this employee relations campaign. as opposed to saying, hey, if we do this employee relations campaign on a conservative basis, this is at least a 3.5x ROI. Let me show you how I came up with that calculation. You're coming with a lot more surety. You're coming with a lot more certainty. You're showing up like a business person. And right off the bat, you're speaking ROI. Those conversations go in two totally different paths. So we have to get comfortable incorporating this stuff. All right, we have time for one more here. Let's talk about conflicts of interest. Okay, so let's say you have a 5,000 employee organization, and there's currently one person on your team that has a fully loaded cost of $60K, who spends 3 months on the disclosure project annually. So this is, you're doing it manual, you're doing it with spreadsheets, they're following up with emails, trying to track who's replied and who hasn't. Maybe you're using a Google form or something like that. Let's say 60% responses to internally generated form are as high risk. Area of risk I'm sorry, hello. 60% of the responses to the internally generated reform are in relation to high risk areas in your risk assessment. And over the last 10 years, you've had two $250,000 conflict of interest costs, fines, okay? And this new tool is gonna cost you $10,000. How do we start to build our case and build our ROI path for this kind of an investment? Well, let's get the pencil out and let's start kind of deconstructing it and seeing which of the 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 things we can start to quantify to build this ROI tool. Remember, ROI is just a tool for persuasion. How do we build that numerator in a credible way to give us some more leverage in these conversations? Okay, our current team cost is one person that we're paying $60K, and they're spending 25% of their time just dedicated to conflicts of interest, management, campaign administration, and so forth. That equates to $15,000 that you're spending right now on conflicts of interest. Let's say the new administration time drops from 25% down to 5%. What is that cost differential? So the team member time spend return is the $60,000 times the difference of 25 minus 5, quick math, I just did this in my head, it's 20%. So that drops, that is a return of $12,000. How about the average ROI fine cost? Well, over the last 10 years, we said that $250,000 has gone out the door in response to, or like explicit costs tied to conflicts of interest, whether those are fines or whether that's a loss of a client or something like that due to this risk area. So that averages 50K per year. So over the last, over the last 10 years, we've averaged about $50,000 per year in conflicts of interest, like explicit cost. So again, we're not going to say that we're going to wave a magic wand and that risk is going to be gone. The only time risk is gone is when you're laying in a coffin. There's always going to be risk. So our job is to navigate through this risk and use tools to create the clarity and improve the quality of the business by de-risking the business. So we're going to make a conservative assumptions that says, hey, we are going to, we're not going to wave a magic wand and drop that down to zero, but we think conservatively, say that word all the time, we think conservatively, we're going to cut our conflicts of interest exposure in half. There's a lot of gaps in our process, and we think that we can reduce this by half. All right, well, we have a bunch of components now. We have a bunch of components for our numerator. This $50,000 that we've spent on average for the last 10 years has been cut in half. So now we have another $25,000 to go ahead and put up in that numerator. So our total return is $37,000. The time savings for this person on our team that we can repurpose and maybe not have to hire somebody else, coupled with the reduced risk exposure, gives us a return of $37,000 divided by the cost of the tool. What's the cost of the tool? The cost of the tool is 10K. So that's a 3.7 return. So again, coming there and saying, hey, we have a lot of inefficiencies in our process. It's building a lot of risk into our business. We have some exposure that we can't really wrap our mind around or wrap our arms around. If we can spend $10,000, I think we can generate almost a 4X return by driving some efficiency gains, first off, but more importantly, significantly reducing our exposure, which has averaged about 50K per year over the last 10 years. It's a much different conversation. So I hope that in this time, I am right on time. How do you like that? I hope in this time you feel a little bit more equipped to start to show that there's a lot more dimensionality to our program and to what we are doing. by leaning into the value, by believing first off that this value exists, that this premium exists, and if it doesn't exist, that it can exist in your organization, you can start to speak the language of finance a lot better. You can demonstrate a more comprehensive, a more fulsome ROI discussion that has a lot more dimensionality, and you can target your efforts towards the highest value activities. If we're just responding to which tire is squeaking the most, we often expend our efforts in a less than efficient and a less than effective way. And it really helps us build stronger relationships in the organization. So you need to expand your value narrative first and foremost. You have to diversify your rhetorical approach. Of course, you need logic, but also put that passion that you have when you come to the EthicsVerse or you read a great article like what Andrew McBride wrote. That passion, you're in this space for a reason. You have the right lens to look at the world and look at your business through, and you need to lean into that and know that what we do matters. We have to pull those people from the dark into the light. We have to screw those light bulbs on at the top so they can understand that we can be such a value add inside the organization. Quantifying across the matrix, and we're going to dive super deep on that persuasion matrix in the next session. So you're not going to want to miss that. But quantifying your approach across the matrix and crafting your persuasion path in line with what that adversary or what is most likely to resonate with that adversary is going to do a lot for you. And again, don't forget about pathos. Don't forget about the power of storytelling. Don't forget about leaning in to the anecdotes, whether they're external, the cautionary tales of competitors who haven't made the investments that you need to make, or things that have happened through your case management system, or things that have been reported. We have to humanize what we're doing because we live in that space. And if we're not bringing that to the conversation, it's easy for folks to just think about, oh, this is just another guardian that's going to waste my time who quote unquote doesn't get it. Look, if what we do doesn't matter, then that green line would not be above the black line in every single market. So it's that premium always exists. Okay. So the last thing to I'm going to wrap up with here, ethics and compliance. A more ethical organization drives higher business quality. Quality is just like the level of excellence in a certain thing. So when we can drive a more ethical culture in our organization, that just inherently drives much more business quality. We have to be able to stand on that. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, like 5 minutes, and then we're going to dive back into the second session. So don't go anywhere. Well, you can go somewhere, get some coffee, go to the bathroom, get a bite to eat, and let's try to blow out. Okay, 3,000, that's okay. 3,000 emojis is okay, but let's blow it out. All right, we'll be back in like five or so minutes. Welcome back. We're going to get started here in a second. Andrew McBride is just dialing into the EthicsVerse right now, so we are going to get started. There he is. Let's get a massive emoji explosion for the one and only Andrew McBride. How's it going, Andrew?
I'm very well, Nick. How are you?
Good, man. Good to see you. So if you guys don't know Andrew, welcome to Earth. He's got a great article. He runs Integrity Bridge. So you should follow him on LinkedIn. You should follow Integrity Bridge on LinkedIn. And you should also go ahead and check out this really cool article he just published. You can find it on LinkedIn or on the Integrity Bridge blog, and it's called Generative Artificial Intelligence Use Cases for Ethics and Compliance Programs. This is the time for us to embrace this technology because it can really create so much leverage for us, and it can create so much more time for us to put our unique gifts to work instead of doing all these inefficient things that really end up kind of clogging up the works. So Andrew won. If you didn't know, he won. He was the leader of Albemarle. A year ago, they won Compliance Program of the Year from Compliance Week, and I've just learned so much from talking to him and from following him. He really has a unique perspective on how to navigate through this next conversation. How to navigate through the underbrush or the thickets that can come along with a violation or trying to get things unstuck with leadership inside the organization. So. So let me kind of dive right in here. Andrew, anything you want to share about Integrity Bridge or about this conversation before we get started?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nick. Oh yeah. So I had the privilege of sitting on the first session, so I was furiously taking notes. And so I left Albemarle a year ago, and I set up Integrity Bridge, and so I'm at the moment helping companies select a lot of the technology that Nick was talking about, and that So part of that support is actually figuring out what that return of investment is. And it's almost kind of like invigorating and challenging to go and find those pockets of kind of upside that you can kind of incorporate into your ROI, into the client's ROI presentation. If you take a step back, there's been a lot of talk about how compliance is meant to embed in business process, but it's also even more important, I think, to be talking in the same way that business do. So if you look at all of the other functions, the business units that are putting their budget proposals together, going up, they are talking in this language of ROI in this holistic way. I would recommend that when you're kind of go back to your desks, pick up the phone, grabbing lunch with some of your functional leads, and see if you get a copy of their presentations that are going at the chain, because I can guarantee that they are talking in the way that Nick is doing. And I'll just call out, I have to say, Nick, thank you on behalf of the ethics compliance community for educating us on this kind of ROI concept. I've seen you do this a couple of times. And it's a bit countercultural for compliance professionals to be thinking this way. Right. And I think through the work that you're doing today and the materials, which I would strongly encourage people to look at, it really is kind of just taking it to another level of how do we make ourselves relevant to business? How do we pleasantly surprise members of leadership that we are talking in the language that they expect from all the other functions? So, kudos to you and the Ethico team.
Thank you, man. Thanks for saying that. That was unplanned. So that was an organic compliment, and that means a lot coming from Andrew. So we kind of scratched the surface. We did a lot of framing in the first session, and now we're going to dive deep into really pulling all of this stuff together and really getting some deeper understanding on how we can drive some of these calculations and how we can integrate them into talk tracks that really resonate with our adversaries. So we're going to do a quick session 1 review in case you're just joining us. We're going to go through about 8 examples of ethical dollar impacts. So we're going to look in 8. Remember that acronym form. We're going to look in at 2 from each of those buckets and quantify those, so you can start to get an idea on what that methodology might be within your organization, what estimates you might need to make, and so forth. Then we're going to dive into the Ars Rhetorica. How does that sound? That sounds very like high end. Okay, it sounds very like Latin. We're going to be talking about understanding personality types and how to intersect the persuasion matrix with those. Then we're going to pull it all together with a number of case studies. I don't know how much time we're going to have to get through all 5 of them, but we'll definitely get through a few. And then finally, we're going to talk about framing tenants, which Andrew is particularly well versed in, and he's really good at. And what I want everybody on this call to recognize is that any of the skills we're talking about, they're all learned skills. No baby is born just being a good read of people or being very persuasive. Actually, babies are extremely persuasive because they cry to get what they want. They always seem to get what they want. Somewhere along the way, we start to kind of grab hold of a new personality, or we start to develop our own personality. And some of these inherent characteristics, these influence characteristics, maybe kind of fall on the back burner. All good. You can start that burner back up and you can start to build these skills. These are all just like little skills to learn. And so let's not view this as a problem. Let's view this whole thing as a new puzzle to figure out, a new skill on our skill tree to build, and starts in what's crazy is that as you start to hear about these kinds of things, you're going to start to see them all around you. You're going to start to say, oh, wow, this person is that kind of a person. Oh, wow. As I've dialed down my own self-focus and I'm tuning in to those people around me, there's a much greater opportunity for me to see what they actually care about. All right, so let's dive in. So here's a quick session 1 review. We're already up to 5,000 emojis. I love it. Okay. We talked about the motivation triad. This is why we do things. We as human beings are wired to avoid pain, to conserve energy, and to seek pleasure. And when we can incorporate more of these elements into our talk track, we're going to be a lot more resonant. Also, when we recognize that any of our persuasion paths, any path of persuasion is just an argument. You're making an argument, and that argument can be more resonant and be more impactful when we can incorporate these different aspects of Aristotle's triangle. So Aristotle's rhetorical triangle, of course, logos, the logical appeals, super critical, but equally critical is the ethos, the appeals to credibility, right? The appeals to pulling credibility into what you're talking about. And then finally, pathos, these emotional appeals. Incorporating all of these things is going to allow us to not be one-dimensional. It's going to allow us to resonate with more people. And it's going to allow us to inject the necessary emotion in our persuasion path or in our rhetorical argument to get the action that we need. Logic makes you think, emotion makes you act. We also talked about the 3.0 framework, where when our departments were first formed, it was very, it was all about risk avoidance. And as we've progressed and as we've grown into this adolescent stage, we're now focused. We have a bunch of tools. We have a bunch of dashboards and pie graphs and all these things. We're really focused, in addition now, to efficiency gains. Here is where we live as a cost center, where we're still in this reactionary mode. The promised land that we're crossing the River Jordan into is one where we are viewed as a strategic advisor to the organization, where we are trusted advisors, where we are more proactive, where we're brought into these strategic discussions faster, and more people know where to look or who to go to, i.e. you, when they have a potential problem. That's what we're heading toward. But again, we're never going to be able to make that transition if we don't do exactly what Andrew was just talking about, showing up and speaking the language of business and being more persuasive and more influential in the organization. We talked in the first session about ROI. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Nate, so just on those, we will go through the first session. What I found really interesting about the logos, the ethos, and the pathos. So, there was a statement that I think you made earlier. It's in the materials of logic makes you think, emotion makes you act, and I think that's it really resonated with me. And I almost kind of fell into the pathos kind of area by accident when I was at Albemarle, where I was presenting to the CEO on a particular proposal, and I was going all in on the logos. I was all going on the ethos, the efficiency of the proposal. But then somewhere in me, we were talking about how I just explained, I just cared about the company. And the CEO just looked at me, and I think it was kind of like this legacy thing for him of he wanted to leave a good legacy before he kind of like moved on. That was the pathos. It was turning kind of like the hard facts, the numbers, the efficiency savings, the effectiveness, but it was into kind of like that emotional connection. And then on that, the compliant. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, that got so much unlocked. Like, in his mind at that moment, he said, "Oh wow, I'm talking to someone that's like me. I'm talking to someone that has the same view of the world as me." You now elevated to a different position in his mind by making that connection. I mean, you told that story. I got chills because I know how impactful that was. Please keep going.
Yeah, that's right. And so I think that's where kind of the connectivity with the core values of your company.
Exactly.
And that emotional connection with kind of like the aspirations, the personal aspirations of leaders about their own kind of reputation and what they're leaving behind at companies. It can resonate, because if you're all looking to, it's not just about compliance, it's about improving and wanting to do better for good. So things like you're improving your human rights program, that's kind of like greater for the common good and invoking that core values. But then you build it into the framework of the 1.0, the 2.0, the 3.0. You move over onto the 3.0. The core area of focus for us was the work that we were doing on supporting these very strict mining sustainability audits. We went to grievance mechanisms and human rights. And because we got those certifications, it made a big deal for our customers. There was a premium associated with that. And suddenly, compliance was being asked to join sales calls by the sales department. And that is like, it's the end game, right? It's about, if you are there and you're seen as that kind of value unlocker, that enabler, that you're actually helping to secure the sale, then it just transforms the perception of compliance. And then when you actually want these functions to do something for you, like support your investment in new technology, a new thing, they're going to be right there with you. Like, sure, compliance totally needs this because it helps us get the sale.
Yeah, and again, none of these perceptions that people have, like, of us are etched in stone. We can show up in a different way and very quickly change that perception. I mean, just think of how impactful that was to the CEO when he knew you cared as much as he did. Think of how impactful that is, and what a reframe that is for the sales team to see, like, oh my gosh, this stuff that's happening in this department that I don't really know that much about is really helping me do my job so much easier. That's how we elevate to, the grown folks table, like I'm always talking about. We talked a little bit about integrating this 3.0 framework into the ROI framework to help us have a a picture of where we need to look and how we can really build up a conservative but compelling numerator in this equation. We're incorporating risk measures, efficiency measures, but also those strategic measures like culture, like things that kind of connect to the greater good to really drive our return up. And then we finally, and this is a good segue into the next section, we talked about this equity risk premium. So this equity risk premium, this green line for more ethical companies always is higher than the black line of everybody else. This equity risk premium, this ethical equity premium is a function of ultimately a higher total enterprise value on a kind of apples to apples basis. Where we're going to look are across these 4 different areas that spell form. You can rearrange that. There's a little jumble for you to keep your attention here. But we're going to look for financial performance factors. We're going to look in operational excellence factors. We're going to do risk reduction factors and market positioning factors. So let's dive in to start to begin quantifying this. So I'm going to run through a bunch of these factors. Like I said, there is a toolkit on the console here. You can download that. There is a couple of documents in there that articulate this even more. So go ahead and download that right now. So this is where we're going to look. Like I just said, this is where we're going to look for components of that ethical premium. We're not going to take all of that premium. We're not going to assume all of it because we need to stay conservative and we need to stay persuasive. But we need to feel comfortable taking little pieces of it, making conservative, estimates, and incorporating those in our numerator. So where do we go for risk reduction factors? Lower regulatory risk. Decreased litigation exposure, less lawsuits, right? Minimizing reputational risk. How can we look at benchmarks, or how can we try to start to quantify less vulnerability to damaging scandals? Where are there some cautionary tales that we can start to quantify and scale up or scale down to our organization to make conservative estimates that start to quantify reputational risk impact that, what Andrew was just talking about might have on the organization? Reduce business continuity risk, diminished systemic risk, okay? Let's talk about operational risk factors. Higher employee productivity. Remember, employee engagement is this like silent killer in every company. Global employee engagement rates hover around 70%. That means people are pushing down, they're getting 100% of their salary, but they're pushing down on the gas only 70%. So that 30% is a dead weight loss in the organization. That's like, you're climbing up the mountain with rocks in your boots and you don't even really notice it after a while. How about lower employee turnover? We know that there's significant costs for turnover, whether it's happening on your team or in aggregate across your organization. Putting the pencil to that, and again, making some estimates around how an initiative might impact it can allow you to take credit for more of that ethical premium that exists or will exist if you get the resources you need into your ROI conversation. Superior talent attraction is another place to look. Enhanced operational efficiency. So a more compliant organization, like there's a perfect corollary in manufacturing. Safety is to manufacturing what an ethical culture is to every single business. So companies that focus on safety, they tend to have much more efficient plants, much more much lower downtime, much lower near misses. All those things are very expensive. Organizations that have a high degree of an ethical culture, there is a lot more business quality. There's a lot more quote unquote goodness. There's a lot more of people's gifts that are being put to work in pursuit of this organization's mission, and all that ends up translating into more enterprise value and a higher premium. Greater innovation capacity. Let's talk about market position factors. So customer loyalty premium. There was a question about the rigor that needs to go into these things. Some of the things we're talking about, there's not a precedent for it, or there's not a, Gallup doesn't have a whole table of all of these benchmarks. But guess what? Marketing departments don't have a table from Gallup that tell them how much they are likely to get from the Super Bowl ad that they're arguing for. They have to craft a case. They have to craft an argument that is compelling. And at the end of the day, we are not all robots that are taking in data and spitting out logical answers. We're human beings. We're bags of bones, okay, that take in emotion, that take in logic and make decisions in our subconscious, and then we validate that with the logic that's been in place. So we just can't come to these conversations with a different rule set than everybody else is coming to these conversations with. We have to learn to speak the language of business, which means we have to understand that perspective that everybody else is looking at. We talked about so price premium capability. I talked about I talked about Patagonia in the last one. There's 100 other examples like Patagonia where they can command a premium for their product as a result of the vibe of the company or the culture of the company. Preferential supplier terms. I was doing a return on integrity session with someone about, within the last 6 months, and we found a massive deal that they were able to get due to the level of governance inside the organization. We took a little bit of credit for that in the ROI discussion, and it really helped the CEO better understand the true impact and the true potential of that department. There's a lot of rocks to look under. I'm telling you, there's so many, when we do things that have a third order impact, there are myriad places for us to look to start incorporating. Market access benefits as well. So I want to dive into, also financial performance factors. Did we talk about these yet? Okay, sorry. Lower cost of capital, higher quality of earnings. I have another anecdote about higher quality of earnings from my friend Mel. She was able to get into a deal that her private equity fund was going to be doing. And because she was brought in early, she was able to uncover a massive risk in the company that really moved the EBITDA down significantly. And had they not had her involved, and she would not have found this massive compliance risk in this acquisition target, they would have substantially overpaid for that company. That allowed for her to, guess what? She's brought into every single one of those conversations now going forward. So there's a quality of earnings impact to the things that we do. Better cash flow sustainability and greater capital allocation efficiency. So I want to dive into here a couple. We're going to look in financial, operational, risk, and market. We're going to do 2 in each of these factors, and I'm going to go kind of quick here because we're going to pull this together in the case studies. So for lower cost of capital, here is the quantification method. If you can compare your borrowing costs to similarly rated companies in your industry, find estimates for borrowing cost differences between your company and peers, or if you were able to gain a lower cost of capital, maybe it was 50 bips less on the cost of debt service driven by the governance, the governance quality inside your organization, you're going to want to pull some of that into your equation. So if you can find the borrowing cost differences or make a conservative assumption about borrowing cost differences, estimation a portion of that difference that you could credibly and conservatively attribute to your program or your efforts, and then multiply that by the total loan amount. This is now another, adding more dimensionality to the impact that we're having. So if so the example here is if you secure a 30 basis point lower than your peers, and you can attribute 40% of that to better lender confidence in your, the quality of your governance apparatus, then we would multiply total debt by 0.3% interest savings times the 40% attribution rate to come up with the annual value. I guarantee you that's going to be a massive number. Let's go to another financial one, long-term growth sustainability. So let's say you analyze analyst long-term growth forecasts for your company versus peers. Even if you're in a private company, even if you're owned by a private equity firm, you have public counterparts. All those public counterparts, they have analyst presentations. They have quarterly, presentations. They have 10 Qs that come out every quarter. They have annual reports that are full of great information that you can borrow, not only to get smarter on your own industry, but to see how the industry is viewed from the street, Wall Street. You're an MBA now, so you can call it the street, okay? You analyze those differences and you start to estimate return differences between ethical companies and all other. Again, you can look at the Ethisphere list and you can look at that premium and you can start to estimate the proportion that you might be able to pull into your conversation. If you can estimate the corresponding growth differential. Look how much I'm saying estimate. How else can you talk about the future? None of us have a crystal ball, so we have to get comfortable with estimating and speaking in ranges and thinking in bets and speaking in bets. Estimate the proportion driven by ethical culture, governance, excellence. And now let's pull that stuff together. So if ethical companies trade at a 12% premium and analysts project 1.5 percentage points higher long-term growth, let's say you assume 30% of that is driven by the more ethical culture. We can drop all those things together into a multiplication equation here and come up with an annual value of ethics contribution. So total enterprise value times 1.5 growth differential times a 30% attribution. That's going to give you the annual value of the ethics contribution to that growth premium. Listen, you're influencing it. You have to be able to take credit for it. And again, I'm not saying to get out over your skis and make spurious claims that like everyone's going to throw up over. I'm saying to make conservative claims that that not only underscore but undercut what that true impact is, because I want my adversary saying, "Oh man, it's probably bigger than that. Oh wow, they're really being too conservative. You know, it's actually much bigger than that." That is so much more compelling when that conversation can be had in your adversary's head. We went over this in the mini case studies in the last episode, or in the last session. Higher employee productivity. So if you can compare engagement scores, whether that's to a historical benchmark or to an industry benchmark, I mean, there's so many engagement data points out there, and you can calculate that difference. We need to take a portion of that difference that's driven. I mean, listen, there's so many white papers about this concept. Where employees always work harder, they're always more engaged in companies that they believe in, where they feel that belonging, where they feel like it's a true ethical culture that they are a part of. So if you look at those engagement scores and they're 15%, let's say, percent higher than an industry average, and research suggests that a 10% engagement increase translate into 5% higher productivity, well, then we can use these metrics to start to quantify what that higher productivity driven by the ethical culture is on the, or has on the bottom line. So we take our total people cost, we multiply that by 7.5%, and we multiply that by the portion of attributable to ethics. So let's say, hey, we're not saying all the employee engagement differential is driven by our ethical culture, but I think 10% of it is. Does that seem reasonable, CFO? Does that seem reasonable, CEO? And that'll come up with our annual value. Separately, we have to get comfortable with future casting. We have to get comfortable helping our organization see around the curve. So we can incorporate conservative assumptions on what we assume the engagement impact might be, the employee engagement impact might be from driving an initiative. So if our employee engagement levels are lower than what they used to be, or maybe they're lower than an industry benchmark, we can make a conservative assumption and say, hey, if we attack this head on and we give people a voice and we do exit interviews and state interviews and stuff like that, we can really attack, retaliation. We think there's going to be a 5% change in employee engagement over the next 12 months. If we're half wrong, this is what the impact is going to be. If we're right, this is what the impact is going to be. And start to present a range of ROIs so they can start to see what the true benefit of this investment might be. So here you go. I think this anti-retaliation campaign will move employee engagement up 2%, even if I'm 4 times wrong. 50 basis point move is going to be worth an 8x ROI, for the crumbs I'm asking you to brush off the table. Lower employee turnover. Again, this is another one of those silent killers. This is like, riding in the Tour de France with like a little bit of, air not in your tires. There's a lot of inefficiency that comes from the turnover. And this has been compounded since the Great Resignation because, like I said in the last session, the cost of changing jobs is lower than it's ever been. So if you can compare turnover rates to industry benchmarks or to your historical averages, you can start to drive to what the productivity impact of this is going to be. So calculate your average industry turnover, subtract out your turnover rate, and multiply that by the number of employees and the average total cost for employees. Again, you want to fully load that, not just with salaries, but also incorporate benefits in there. And multiply that by the change in turnover rate. Okay, so if you can affect that turnover rate a little bit, we need to multiply that out across that true cost of turnover to get a better picture. So if industry turnover is 15%, but yours is 9%, and you attribute 5% of this difference to your ethics culture, to your culture of ethics, 5% is a very small number, but when we're dealing with these big numbers, 5% of a really massive number, particularly relative to the cost of your department, it's going to give you a massive thing to put in the numerator that's going to help them see the importance of this a lot better. So you can do 6%, right? That 6% differential times the employee count times the cost of turnover times 10 or times 5%, that 5% attribution, and that's going to drive your savings. Lower regulatory risk. So this is an easy one. You can look at average industry regulatory fines. You can find a cautionary tale from another competitor and scale that regulatory fine down or up to the size of your organization, or you can just calculate some kind of an average over the last 5 years and then multiply that by your assumed decreased probability of receiving such fines. Okay. So if the industry average is $5 million of fines per year with a 15% probability of that occurring, but you think your compliance program or your ethical culture can reduce that probability to 3%, this is how we would go ahead and calculate it. So it's a $5 million fines times the 15% chance of that happening, minus the 5 million times the 3% reduction, or the reduction down to 3%. That would generate $600,000 annually. So again, we want to be able to think in ranges. We can say, okay, you know what, we're not going to cut that, we're not going to maybe drive that all the way down to 3%. Maybe we're only going to drive that to 5%. Well, that's going to change that number. But if you can present both, it's going to show that you've been thoughtful about it. And if they can see that, okay, even on the low end, this is going to be a high ROI, that's always going to be more persuasive. Okay. You got to get that logic in there with that surety, with that certainty, because that logic makes you think and the emotion makes you act, like we always say. How about decreased litigation exposure? So if you can look at your legal settlements or defense costs tied to a particular category, maybe it's discrimination and harassment, maybe it's wrongful termination, maybe it's some of these things that you can affect directly, or you can look, like I said, at industry benchmarks and scale those to the size of your organization. You can start to calculate, well, what's our decreased litigation exposure? So if the industry peers spend 5 million or 4 million annually, and your company spends 1.2, you can attribute a portion, let's say 25% of this difference to your program, resulting in a $700,000 annual value. Also, you can, I want to keep underscoring this, because if we're not comfortable talking about the future, if we're not, again, every M&A transaction, it's all based on future casting. It's all based on some kind of a forecast that, hey, if we invest this money, we think it's going to drive this much enterprise value going forward. So we need to be comfortable talking about the future. And again, talking in ranges and, thinking in bets. Any deal that I've ever done, we always present three different investment cases. We present a base case, what we think is going to happen. We present an upside case if everything goes really well, and then we present a downside case if we miss some stuff and things really, the train really gets off the track. Being able to put these goalposts on and kind of talk about things in a range, it kind of puts us, it kind of like draws a border around the conversation and allows us to really kind of triangulate on what is most likely with some data points. Okay, so start to think about what impact, if you ran this initiative or you got this tool, where is it going to show up? And what estimates can you make around litigation exposure, employee turnover, whatever, and create some kind of a range? The conversation is going to exist within that range if your underlying assumptions are conservative enough, okay? All right, we got two more here. Customer loyalty premium. So if you, so now we're in market position factors. So customer loyalty premium, if you can compare customer retention rates against industry benchmarks, calculate the lifetime value of the difference from the higher retention, and then attribute a portion of that to your ethical reputation. Again, it's going to be silly for you to come in and say 100% of our our lower churn is driven by our ethical premium. That's not going to be compelling, but 1% of it might be, 5% of it might be. Let's put a pencil to it and see what that might look like. If your retention is 8% higher than the industry, leading to $15 million in additional customer lifetime value annually, and surveys indicate that ethics influences 10% of retention decisions, then that translates into 1.5 of annual value. So when we're, when we're tasked with proving the value of our department, we need to have a very compelling case of 1,000 things that, 1,000 of these third order impacts, obviously not 1,000, a dozen of these third order impacts that we are likely having in the organization, and starting to really stack the deck in our favor by, loading up that numerator. So how do you calculate LTV? LTV is lifetime value. So you can look at the average customer relationship length, and you multiply that by the average annual spend. So if it's a SaaS company, it's the annual contract value. If it's a service business, how long do these folks use you as a engagement, and what are they spending on average? Or you can do 1 divided by the gross retention rate, and that's going to give you your average years. And when you come up with your average years, that's going to translate into annual spend. Guess what? Your client success team, your chief revenue officer is zeroed in on gross revenue retention. Getting that data point is going to be very easy. They probably know it off the top of their head. And that can give you some sense of like, what is the lifetime value of a client? What portion of that could I credibly attribute to the culture that we're building inside of our organization? It's a much bigger number than you can imagine, okay? Preferential supplier terms, I'm going to go through this one pretty quick because I kind of already alluded to it. But if you can secure 5% better pricing, or if you can increase the odds of closing by 1 or 2% because of the governance that's in place, where you can skate through that third-party risk management process on, the new client side, take a little bit of that into your conversation. So if your annual, if the annual procurement spend times this 5% savings times some kind of attribution, let's say it's 30%, let's say it's 10%, make some estimates about that in Excel or in Google Sheets, whatever you use, and you can start to see how these estimates translate into that annual value on the back end. All right. Anything to add there? I needed to blast through.
You did, through yeah. So I was going to kind of add some insights from my experience at BHP and Albemarle, kind of like what you went through, Nick. So yeah, I think that what's really interesting is that we might feel a little bit kind of like nervous about taking the credit for some stuff, but I can guarantee you there are other functions and business units that are absolutely taking that credit, and so we could try and get a slice of that pie through the efforts that the ethics and compliance team are doing. Just some other thoughts. So on the risk lens, sometimes it's quite difficult to be thinking in abstract, kind of like what are those risks that we are collectively mitigating? And I saw a question from Doug in the chat about risk and risk taxonomy. It is actually a really helpful idea to go through your company, if it's a public company, your 10K risk factors, or your ERM register. And it's amazing that suddenly you'll have like sparks flying, thoughts flying about how you can connect the work that you're doing on one particular program to those risks. And guess what? If they're doing their ERM program right, what they should be tracking is the evolution of that risk over time as there's more and more controls put in place. Again, you can grab a slice of that value, that risk reduction. That's there for the taking. On the operational side, the value of the performance metrics. I mean, it's interesting. The Department of Justice, when I was before them, the SEC, they were interested in my performance metrics across all of our compliance program. But then at the same time, a lot of those metrics, I was also being accountable within the company. The company had, which many of you might have, is the objectives and key results. Across all businesses, all functions had OKRs, and we had to demonstrate how we were performing with the execution of our processes. And so the development of those metrics is absolutely key. Benchmarking. So where appropriate, kind of drawing in from the relevant benchmarking material to demonstrate the value that you are achieving. Obviously Ethico are producing a whole bunch of benchmarking reports. It's incredibly valued. But maybe somewhere there is a Gartner subscription there where it may not be directly on point on ethics compliance, but there's some really valuable benchmarks in there that you can connect some of the work that you're doing for the reduction of that risk. And then finally, collaboration. So in as much as you want to try and take a piece of that credit, it's important that you're collaborating with those key stakeholders. So, for example, when Nick was going through the whole cost of capital exercise, I think working with the Treasury Department to kind of figure out, one, that you're getting the calculation correct, and then also what your attribution of that is, I think is really important. The same with HR turnover. They will quite rightly feel proud if there is a strong employee retention number, that a large part of that is due to their work. But there is also all of the work that we do on things like Speak Up and our broader kind of core values and the code of conduct, having that collaborative discussion so that when you are both going up to senior management and to the board, you're talking the same language and you're sharing that credit.
Yeah, there's a great comment in the chat that says, share the credit, create a friend. I love that. A couple of quick questions here. This is actually more of a comment. This is from Cynthia. Thanks for sharing this, Cynthia. I work with sales a lot, and they are constantly aware of the impact that complying helps get them the sales. We have 2 information security certifications for our SaaS solution, and it always is value add to help close the sales that we any glasses, that are on top of we're on top of our information security. So again, staying in touch with those folks and really letting your light shine and reminding people of that the things you're doing have impacts downstream. That's not boastful. That's not like turning into a braggart. That's taking credit for the things that you need to take credit for and ensuring that you have that people have the right frame around your function.
It's a really good example, Nick, because it's a combination of the 2.0 and the 3.0, because you've got efficiency in how you are responding to a request that is making you look good with a prospective customer who might otherwise walk away.
That's a great point. All right, let's dive in. Thank you for sharing those points, because there was so much good in what you said. But that anecdote about these regulators caring about your performance metrics and how those integrated with the rest of the business and what you're looking at, that should give that should give all of us some clues. That should give us some more ammunition, some insights into what the regulators care about for our conversation. Remember, this is a game of influence and this is a game of persuasion. We need to be compelling. We need to be logical, of course, but we also need to build some credibility for what we're saying, and who has more credibility than a regulator. Okay. The Ars Rhetorica. So we talked in the last session about this persuasion matrix, and we kind of just really brushed the surface of it. Right now, we're going to dive into the persuasion matrix, and we're going to cut that against another axis, which is personality type, so that we can have some clues on what we should be leaning into depending on who our adversary is and how that adversary is wired. So this is going to help you do a couple of things. This is going to help you frame out your program, expand beyond pain avoidance / risk mitigation. It's going to help you balance your logical arguments and not oversample into what would resonate with you. We have this I just made this up. Everyone is like me bias. We think everyone is like us and everyone's not like us. So there's a lot of different personality types. And if we communicate to someone who's very different than us as if we were communicating to ourselves, well, then we're not going to be as resonant or persuasive. And it's going to really help us speak the language of leadership. And again, help us pick that lock a little bit faster. So I want to start. So we have our persuasion matrix, but let's talk about a personality type matrix. This is pretty basic here. Everyone has seen this in some kind of a form. So this matrix has kind of on our vertical axis, we have formal versus informal. So are they task oriented or are they people oriented? And on our horizontal axis, how introverted or extroverted, or how easygoing versus how dominant are they? So we're going to talk about 4 different personality types. We're going to talk about A, B, C, and D. So type A personality types, these are dominant and task oriented. These are task over people, and they are dominant / extroverted, right? They're goal oriented, they're risk taking, they're good under stress. Type B, these are your socializers, okay? So type B are relationship oriented, right? They're more informal, they're more people oriented, but they're also very outgoing. They're very enthusiastic people. Then we have type C. Type C are task but also introverted and less dominant, okay? So these are detail-oriented. These are your thinkers, right? They're very logical. They're very dialed in. They're always very prepared. They're not kind of these are not your shoot-from-the-hip types, okay? And then we finally have our supporters. And our supporters, we're going to call type D today. And these are our task-oriented. These are stabilizing. These are cautious folks that are really focused on the people aspect of things. So on this vertical axis, we have director, socializer, thinker, and supporter, but you can see how these connect to any number of these other personality type frameworks that exist out there. We have the Young framework, we have the DISC framework. I'm sure a lot of you have taken the DISC framework. We have the Insights, Myers-Briggs type indicator. This is how these 16 types sort of nest into these 4 sort of parent types. Some of you might be Enneagram fans. These are the types that sort of correspond to type A, B, C, and D. Some of you have used the PSI, I think this is the Strength Finder, whether you're a controller, a promoter, an analyst, and a supporter. And then finally, our good friend Plato, he was thinking about personality types back in the day, whether you're a guardian, an artisan, a scientist, or a philosopher. So we're going to start to tune in to the personality type of our adversary, and we're going to start to cut that against and leverage that persuasion matrix so that we can say the right things to better resonate with them. Again, if we're just leading with logos, you're not going to resonate with all these different types. If you're just leading with pathos and quote unquote touchy-feely things, that's not going to resonate with a thinker as much as it is with a supporter. So let's kind of do a flyby on these types, and then we'll dive into how these can integrate into the persuasion matrix. Okay, so what are the personality types of the director? These are take charge. This is like a CEO type. They're multitasking. They're dominant and stubborn. They're ambitious. They're motivated by what? They're motivated by opportunity. They're motivated by winning, success, leadership, right? They are motivated by challenges, right? They have a high sense of urgency. What are phrases that resonate with them? Let's get this going. Let's move fast. Let's talk about results. What do you think about this? This is going to be a great return on investment. These guys are moving fast, and they have a high level of impatience. Okay, socializer. This is the red one, type B. These are enthusiastic, fun-loving. They're motivators. They're sometimes procrastinators. They're spontaneous and impulsive. They're motivated by what? They're motivated by external factors like being the best, by succeeding, by public recognition, by being better than their peers. Phrases that resonate with them is, this is going to be fun. This is entertaining. You're the best. People love you. These are some great ones to use on me. Okay, thinkers. Thinkers are all about detail and accuracy. Okay, so these are not, these people's desks are very organized. Their to-do list is very organized. There's lines through it all, right? They are dependable. They're high conscientious folks. They're independent, lawful. Like I say, they are detached in some ways. They take feedback as data. They don't take it personal. These are motivated by problem solving. They are motivated by control, by like de-risking a system, by lowering the volatility of whatever you're talking about. Phrases like perfection. These are your perfectionists, okay? Phrases like perfection, explaining how something works, right? These are the guys that would be taking, these are the folks that would take apart the watch or the radio to see how it works. That's that type. You guys know all these different types, okay? I'm just kind of trying to go over them quickly. And then finally, the supporter, they are consistent, they're sincere, they are, they're self-confident. Sometimes they're a little bit more resistant to change. They're motivated by what? They're motivated by stability. They're motivated by lowering risk, the benefit of the team, a calm working environment. They don't like the chaos that comes from a lot of change. Phrases that resonate most with them are things like, this is going to help a lot of people. This is going to help us relax the atmosphere. Those are the types of things that really resonate. Okay, so I'm going to run through now. Now let's dive deep into each of these types and see how, which of these 9 boxes in the persuasion matrix are really going to resonate most with them, okay? So we've spent a bunch of time talking about ethical premium. We spent a bunch of time talking about persuasion basics. We talked about, calculation basics. We have our mindset right. We are equipped to start building our ROI case and starting to quantify in a conservative way what the dollar impact on enterprise value that comes from our initiatives. Now we're kind of crafting our talk track, our persuasion path, depending on who our audience is, okay? So again, directors, please.
Maybe just one, as we go through this, it's sometimes you may not know the people that you're going to be speaking to. Like if it's someone in senior management who's not normally part of your circle. So then thinking about who can you get to enlist to help educate on what is driving, what persona does each of the people that you're speaking to, right? Find an ally in finance or in procurement, supply chain, who knows that leader really well. Maybe rehearse kind of what you're planning to say with that person to see if it resonates with what we're about to go to.
So a great hint for a director is they don't like to do a bunch of small talk before the conversation. They just want to kind of get to it. Let's get it moving, right? These are highly competitive people. And what you just said is so critical, Andrew. Just starting to think about, okay, I have to craft this. I'm gonna have to say this a little bit differently to this person versus that person who's maybe more like me, can give us some massive clues and just like multiply the odds of being influential and the odds of persuasion or of persuading that person. Hello. So these are ambitious, short, fused people. Here's where these guys are focused, okay? These 3 boxes are really where you want to focus. So these are goal-oriented, risk-taking, impatient people. And so we are going to be primarily trying to resonate with logos, logic, because they're logical folks, right? They're task over people type people. And we are going to be pleasure-seeking because these guys are trying to win. They're driven by success and they're driven by challenges. So our most effective quadrants are pleasure-seeking in logos, right? 3.0 in logos. So this is ROI, this is growth opportunities, this is competitive advantage metrics. 3.0 and ethos, right? Track record of delivering results, proven business outcomes, and then finally, our traditional approach, which is really going to be pain avoidance and logic. These are very logical people. So quick, quantifiable risk scenarios with immediate solutions. That's what's going to resonate most. So what's our communication strategy? We're going to do bluff, which is bottom line up front. Okay, we're going to lead with the bottom line. We're going to use phrases like cutting edge, immediate results. There's a great ROI on this. Like somebody who is a supporter, they're not thinking about ROI first. They're thinking about stability and they're thinking about people first. Somebody who's a CEO type or a CFO type, who's maybe this type A director, they want to know that fast and they want to get moving. So our ability to be chameleons and change our style a little bit, it just has multiplicative impacts on what we're talking about. All right. Avoid long explanations. So don't send them this webinar, okay? Let's dive into type B. Type B is the red one. This is the socializer. These folks are enthusiastic. They're charismatic. They're impulsive, right? They got a short attention span. What was that? So what do they like? Well, this is the bottom corner. So it's a lot of pathos. It's a lot of emotion, and it's a lot of pleasure seeking, right? That's the impulsive intersection in there. So these are relationship-oriented, people-focused folks. So we really want to lean into that pleasure-seeking and that pathos. A lot of storytelling, a lot of emotion in there. Okay. So our most effective quadrants, like I said, is seek pleasure and pathos. So that's success stories. Seek pleasure and ethos. That's strategic partnerships, and conserving energy and pathos. So that's our relief narrative. Okay. This is relief from social conflicts and team harmony. And more team harmony, okay? Because again, these are people. So what is our communication strategy? We want to start with that relationship thing. We want to talk about people are going to love this. You're going to be the hero. This is going to be so much fun to roll this out. You got to get, these are highly sensitive to excitement. So you can get them very excited very easily, okay? Include testimonials. Again, that's more of that pathos with a little bit of the credibility. But avoid detailed technical specifications. You might like that. You might like those details because you're a high conscientious, detail-oriented person, but not everybody likes that. Some people, they just want to see, what's the big picture here? So being able to scale up or scale down depending on that audience can really do a lot to improve your success. Okay, type 3 thinkers. Andrew, of course, jump in anytime here, buddy. I really want us to get, okay. So the type 3 thinkers, this is the yellow one. This is type C. Oh, not type 3. C and 3. Okay. Type C thinkers. These are detail oriented. These are dependable, but they're skeptical. You know those folks that you say, hey, I got a great idea, and they sit back and they're like, they're all from Missouri. You know what I mean? They're very skeptical. They're lawful. They want to follow the rules.
Or Charlotte, okay? Nick. Or Charlotte.
Or Charlotte. Okay.
Yeah.
You got to show
I'm
me.
I'm a thinker, but you would not know it from the state of my desk at the moment.
All right. Well, there's we're all a little blend of a bunch of these things. But again, like no one's going to be squarely a thinker. No one's going to be squarely a director. We're all blends of these. I mean, think of the Myers-Briggs. There's 16 types. Enneagram has 9 types. Here, we're only talking about 4 types. But just kind of starting to tune into it, you're going to start to see clues when someone's like, okay, get to it. Or somebody is an interrupter. You know what I'm saying? These are going to be clues on how you can craft your style to be more resonant with them. Okay, so these are the boxes for the thinker, the top left boxes. We're going to be, these are, like I said, detail-oriented. They're going to be systematic. They're analytical. So we're going to be pain avoiders, and we're going to be leaning into logos, okay? Those are going to be our primary resonant, elements. So our main quadrants are going to be pain avoidance and logos. That's our traditional approach. We can hit it out of the park with these folks a lot because a lot of them are wired like we're wired. We're going to do conserve energy and logos. Again, these are efficiency people. They don't like wasting a lot of resources. So we're going to be talking about conserving energy and logos. Those are those efficiency gains. And then finally, we're going to be doing pain avoidance and ethos. We're going to be demonstrating protection. We're going to show how this initiative might drive a lot more protection to the organization. So we're going to lead with a thorough analysis. We want to convey to them that we've done our homework, that there's a layers of detail below if they want to dive into it. We're going to be talking, again, these are our perfectionists. So we need to resonate with that. If their goal at their core is, perfectionism, then talking about perfection and talking about a systematic approach and talking about less volatility and more process, these are all the things that really get these folks going. Providing a detailed documentation, an appendix that has all your work and all of your assumptions. the type B, they're not even going to look at that appendix. The type C, they're going to be spending all of their time in the appendix, and they're going to be looking very close with their pencil. Okay, so avoid high pressure tactics with these folks. Again, remember that they are less extroverted, they're more introverted, they're more easygoing, and that is that's like kryptonite. If you're doing the full court press with these folks, that can do a lot to derail it and really kind of slow you down. All right. Finally, we're getting to the supporter. Okay. The supporter is easygoing, and they are more people oriented than task oriented, right? They're people over task type folks. Okay. They're very sincere. They're dependable. These are our rock stars as compared to our superstars. These are the people that you always can rely on. They are also very non-confrontational. So we want to keep it we want to keep that in mind when we're talking to these folks. So where do you think the boxes are going to show up here? You're exactly right. These are stability, team people, security seeking type archetypes. And we are going to be talking about conserving energy and trying to incorporate multiple rhetorical elements. Okay, so the most effective quadrants are going to be conserving energy and pathos, which is emotional impact, relief narrative. This is a story that's showing what this is going to do to the people on the team. Okay, the benefit. We're going to be talking about pain avoidance and pathos. So like, what's the emotional impact that this initiative is going to have? And then finally, we're going to be talking about conserving energy, because again, these are stability focused folks. Okay, so how is this going to drive more stability? How are you going to provide more trusted guidance? And how is this stability going to, you got to put them in the picture of more stability. Okay. So we're going to emphasize that in security. We're going to talk about the people aspect of it a little bit more. We're going to be, again, these are people, right? So we're going to be talking about helping others, what the impact on the team is going to be. And we're going to avoid those high pressure change scenarios in competitive language. These are not like the most competitive people. These we had a contest of who could spin around the chair faster last week, and I was pretty pissed that I lost. So I'm not one of these people. Okay, everything's a competition for me. But there are other people that are fine with not spinning in a chair that fast. Okay, so here's what you want to take a screenshot of, or here's what you want to definitely download. This tells you which of the 4 types or which of the quadrants. I guess it's, I don't know, whatever the word for 9 boxes are, but which of these 9 boxes are going to resonate most and where we want to concentrate our talk tracks relative to who we're talking to. You brought up, I'm going to skip through this one, Andrew, but you brought up this thing of actually, I will go back to this. So again, type A's, we want to talk about competitive advantage. We want to talk about ROI. We're going to use supporting evidence like benchmarks and speed metrics. And our calls to action, like, we got to get going on this. We got to get moving. We want to bring some of that urgency. For a type B, we're going to talk about recognition and team success, right? We're going to talk about culture benefits. We're going to talk about peer testimonials. And we're going to say, like, we need to be a leader in the industry, or our peers are already doing this. We got to catch up to these folks. That's going to really resonate with a B. That's not going to resonate that much with an A, because an A kind of makes their own path. Okay. A type C, the primary message focus is going to be on risk mitigation and quality. Again, these are our perfectionists. So we're going to have detailed analysis. We're going to have systematic proof. And I find that sometimes C's struggle with this whole concept because the way to get a lot of this unlocked is through estimates and through making claims about the future that can't be substantiated yet because that future hasn't happened. Like Andrew said a couple of minutes ago, every other department is doing this. So it's a muscle that we have to build. Just because that muscle is not strong doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. You just have to start kind of working it out a little bit. Okay, and then finally, type Ds, we're going to talk about stability and security. Long-term benefits and team protection is going to be our kind of supporting evidence. That's what's really going to kind of resonate with them. And talking about a call to action that's like ensuring the team's future, ensuring that we can get the chaos out of this process. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, this is the one I'm going to skip. So you can check out kind of what each type responds to, and you can kind of pull some of these things in, whether it's lower regulatory risk for a type C, it's longer sustainable growth for a type D, it's customer loyalty or superior talent acquisition. These are some of the items from that form section, and which ones we might want to lean in, and which ones have a higher likelihood of resonating with these folks. So Andrew talked about this. He kind of alluded to this before, And last week on the Tuesday session, when we had a whole session about like how to present to the board, this challenge comes up a lot. When you're presenting to a board where they're not all a bunch of automatons all wired the same, how do you kind of navigate that? So one great tactic that came from that session was to really speak first to that leader, right? Like there's some chairman of that board, or there's some leader on that audit committee. Disproportionately craft your message toward that person, because that person has a disproportionate impact on the culture of that group. Okay, so keep that in mind. But if you have a mixed team, this is a great kind of like off the shelf kind of framework to increase the odds that you're going to resonate with more of these folks. Okay, so you're going to start with A. Remember, A's, you want to lead with a little bit of math. You want to lead with a little bit of ROI. This investment is going to generate 2.3 in a competitive advantage while reducing our regulatory risk by 2/3. 3 peer companies have already implemented this successfully, and their teams are describing it as transformational. That's really going to resonate with that B. The type C is going to resonate with something like this. Our detailed 47-point analysis, i.e. we've done our homework here, shows that there's a systematic improvement across all risk categories with a methodical implementation reducing error rates by 85%. That is like, that's like dessert for a C. Error rates going away, more perfection, right? Better process adherence. And then finally, the conclusion, opening, development, analysis, and conclusion. The conclusion can really bring a friend in one of these different departments or on these different teams. As to what that sort of personality makeup of the group is going to give you a lot of clues on how you can kind of navigate that a little bit better. You should never have a press play talk track where I say the same thing to 5 different people. I'm trying to get an initiative unlocked, and I'm saying the 5 thing to 5 different people. There's so much variation across the board. And if you start to open your eyes and open your ears, you're going to get a lot of clues as to which type someone most likely will be. This is an art and a science. It's both of those things that we have to bring together.
Hey, Nick, just one amusing anecdote. So, and it ties in addition to kind of what you're saying, making sure you're saying it to the right person. So, well, the first time I presented to the BHP board, I spent most of the time talking to some, body language focused on kind of like one person who I thought, and it turns out that person was the outside auditor and not a member of the board. I got the people completely wrong. And so making sure you know exactly who it is that you're speaking with your script, doing that background research in terms of what they look like, and then also what you're going to say it's a small thing, but it's super important. It's
so important. It's literally the easiest thing we can do to kind of start getting more influence going across these different groups of adversaries that we have to influence in order for our risk management apparatus to work. Like, we can't do this job by ourselves. We need the participation. We need the endorsement of leaders or of stakeholders up and down that leadership stack. So that's great. Okay, so now we're pulling the persuasion pie out of the oven. We're going to be putting this all together, and we have a number of different case studies here. How are we doing on time? Okay, yeah, we're great. Okay, so here's a case study for a new case management system, okay? So what is our fact pattern? So our adversary is Sarah Chen. She's the CFO. Fast-paced decision maker, focused on ROI, impatient with long explanations. She's very competitive. She's results-driven, and she frequently asks, what's the bottom line? What does Sarah sound like to you? What type? 1,000 points. That's right, type A director, okay? So what is our request? Our request is $45,000 investment in an integrated case management system to replace our current fragmented approach. What's the context? The context is we are currently using, thank you, 1,000 points to everyone. I'm a little delayed here, but 1,000 points. Okay, context is the company uses spreadsheets and email for case tracking, leading to a lot of inefficiencies and compliance gaps. So, what is the traditional approach? Before you came to this webinar, or before you kind of leveled up in this perspective, this is what we would typically say. We need to create a case management system because our current process creates compliance risks. The manual tracking is error prone and could lead to regulatory violations. This system would help us better manage our cases and maintain proper documentation. Yawn. That's a yawn for an A, okay? So where are we going to be looking in this based on the fact that Sarah is an A? Well, these are the three boxes. So we might lead with our current fragmented system creates 1.2 of annual exposure, 1.2 million of annual exposure from incomplete case documentation. Companies with integrated case management report 35% faster resolution times and 60% better regulatory relationships, which we've quantified and we've estimated to be 2.1 million of competitive advantage annually. This method I'm proposing has been recognized as best in class by compliance institutes and will help position us as a leader and an innovator rather than a follower. Great. Guess what Sarah said? She said, yeah. How much is it? Absolutely. Go ahead and do it. See how easy that is? All right. Anything on that, Andrew?
All good. I think it was perfect.
Okay. All right. Let's jump into the anti-retaliation initiative. Our next section is some really, it's a cool bonus section. So we're going to blast through these next couple of cases. And you'll notice when you download the file, all of the calculations that are in particularly that logos column are, they are articulated in the toolkit on how to drive those kinds of calculations. If you need some help with that, please do reach out. Okay, so now we're talking to Michael Rodriguez. He is our CHRO. He's relationship focused. He's enthusiastic about people initiatives. He likes team harmony. He seeks recognition, and he's concerned about employee satisfaction scores. What does Michael sound like to you? You got it. Correct. Give yourself 1,000 points if you thought he was a socializer or a B, okay? So what is our request? There you go. Man, you are on it. Sarah is on it today. Request $180,000 for a comprehensive anti-retaliation program, including training, including exit and stay interviews, new investigation protocols. Maybe you're upgrading your system to a higher tier to give you more of the feature sets available, and a full-on culture assessment. This is going to cost $180K. The context shows that employee survey, good, Cynthia, smart. The employee survey showed 34% of employees fear retaliation for reporting issues, which is below the industry average of a 52% comfort level. So how would we have normally said this? We need to implement a anti-retaliation program to reduce legal risks and ensure compliance with employment laws. Retaliation claims are costly and could expose us to significant liability. This program will help keep the company, prevent the company from falling into lawsuits. Okay? This might really resonate with a thinker, right? This might really resonate with a type C, but with a type B, this is not that compelling. Oops, I guess I missed the slide here. Sorry about that. You can just picture those red boxes on there. I apologize for that. So let's dive into the next one here. Sorry about that. Okay.
Hey, Nick, just one point on that retaliation was, so just thinking about kind of, the framing of that investment. Obviously, you when you've put in the investment, it's really important to then be demonstrating after the investment how that investment has performed.
Exactly.
And so, yes, that could come from, an updated survey, but there are other ways, like other data metrics that you can kind of like invest in to show or to monitor for that retaliation, because it goes to that point of trust, right? You've asked for this investment of $150,000, and you're going to say, I'm going to come back to you and I'm going to show you what that investment has done after we've made it.
Yeah, and to your point, you have to search for confirmatory evidence of this bet. And there's a lot of places to look for it. Okay. It's not going to just, you're not going to get a receipt under your door that says you added $5 million of value to the organization. You have to build that case. But again, that's what the game is. The game is argumentation. The game is persuasion. So we have to build a compelling case with the data that we have available. And we have to be comfortable making estimates based on other data points that are, conservative and compelling. Okay.
And that's the point about the program effect. So it's not really the subject of this discussion, but the concept of program effectiveness before the regulators, you're trying to demonstrate your program is working. Here, you're trying to demonstrate that your investment is paying off, again, through the similar metrics.
Great point. Okay, let's talk about a headcount investment. Okay, so the fact pattern, we're talking to Dr. Patricia Wang. She's the CEO. She's very detail oriented. She's analytical. She wants comprehensive justification, a methodical decision making. She wants her processes followed. She's very risk averse, and she prefers thorough documentation. What does she sound like? See, you guys are already great at this. 1,000 points for every answer. That is correct. Okay. There's so many clues. Like, people leave clues on who they are all around them. So she's a type 3 or type C thinker. We are requesting 2 additional heads on our team for $200,000 of total comp, right? That's a fully loaded cost to address the expanding regulatory requirements. Our team currently has 3 analysts covering 47 regulatory domains, with new privacy and AI regulations adding more complexity. Very good. I'm running out of points here. I got a lot of points to give out to you guys. Very good. Phenomenal. See, this is so easy and fun. Okay. All right, so our traditional approach would say, hey, we're understaffed in compliance and we need more people to handle the workload. Industry standards suggest we need more analysts given our size and complexity. Without additional headcount, we risk falling behind regulatory requirements. How are we going to upgrade? How are we going to, like, as Mary Shirley would say, how are we going to level up our persuasion path in the context of this thinker we are talking to? Well, this is where we're going to focus. So we're going to focus on logos and pain avoidance. We're going to focus on logos and energy conservation, and we're going to focus on credibility and pain avoidance. Okay, these 3 boxes. So we did a detailed analysis that shows that our current staffing only covers 73% of the required regulatory monitoring. This gap represents up to 4.2 million of potential penalty exposure based on historical patterns. And so proper staffing is going to help reduce overtime costs by $95,000 while eliminating the inefficiencies of rushing through complex regulatory assessments. Each analyst is going to be able to cover an optimal 23 domains versus the current 15.7. If we're able to do this, and we have, having conducted multiple workforce optimization studies for 15 compliance programs, I've documented the exact correlation between staffing ratios and regulatory incident rates. Again, we're not talking about making claims that are false. We're talking about underscoring and leaning into things that are going to resonate more. This type of thinker type is going to be, they like pain avoidance, and they like the credibility that can come along, by leaning into that ethos. All right. What about this one? This is a good one here. Okay, so we got James Thompson. How are we doing on time here? I think we're good. So James Thompson, he's our chief legal officer. He's security focused. He avoids confrontation. These are hints, okay? Values team stability, another big hint. He prefers gradual change. He's not a big, he doesn't have good sea legs, okay? And he's relationship oriented and wants to see consensus. This is a type D supporter. If you thought supporter as I was talking, give yourself 1,000, okay? We need 125K for structured exit interview program to include third-party interviews, data analytics, and cultural improvement initiatives. Currently, we have informal exit interviews that lack consistency. Our adoption rate, awesome. I love seeing all those Ds in there. And we don't capture the meaningful insights that we know are walking out the door given our higher turnover rate. Okay, so how are we going to attack this conversation with this supporter? Well, traditionally, we're going to say we should implement a formal exit interview program to gather better data. This is going to help us understand problems before they become bigger issues and ensure we're capturing all relevant information. There's a way that we can whip those mashed potatoes up and make them and plate them a little bit better when we're talking to a supporter. So remember, go ahead, Andrew.
The only thing I was going to say was who's asking for the budget here, right? So in this one, on the exit interview, it could be you tag teaming with HR to kind of like put this
great point.
Investment request up, because on the exit interview, that's typically a process that's owned by HR, but ethics and compliance have a really big stake in the success of that. And so I think that whenever you're talking about an investment, whether it's tech or other types of investment, thinking about who is the right person to be putting up the chain for approval and supporting that is key. I had one example where the employee and our employee expense management, we supported finance's pitch for that, but we weren't actually kind of doing the submission. We just took the benefit of it when it was actually implemented. But there's opportunities everywhere for you to tag team with other functions with that approval request.
That's a really phenomenal point. Like, if the ethics and compliance department or the HR department is truly optimized, if it's truly actualized, and is that circulatory system of the organization, it's touching all these different departments. So us driving more collaboration, as you were saying before, with these other departments really adds a lot of like extra power to our initiative. We can tag team an initiative together, or we can share budget. That's again, that's a function of the trust and the relationships that we're able to build, and the true partnerships that we're able to build across the organization. This is not a one-man show type of position we're in. This is a circulatory system. This is a highly integrated, potentially a highly integrated function that touches so many different departments inside the organization. So we have to use that to our benefit. So we're talking to this unicorn chief legal officer who is a supporter. So the way we might say this is to say, this methodology is going to streamline our entire exit interviewing process, requiring only 20 minutes per interview while capturing 3 times more actionable intelligence than our current informal approach gets us. Without proper exit interviews, departing employees may harbor resentments that manifest as legal claims later down the road, disrupting, again, these people hate disruption, right? Disrupting the team stability and the peaceful environment we've worked so hard to build. So instead of wondering what departing employees are really thinking and worrying about these hidden issues, this approach is going to allow us to get clearer, more gentle feedback that's going to help us improve without confrontation or surprise. That's good. That sounds really good. Okay. All right. What about this last one? This is perfect. We got about a half an hour for this bonus section, and this is like my favorite section coming up here. Okay. So is this too much with these case studies? I think these are good. What are you going to say? No one can even answer me back. I guess you drop it in.
I think they're good, Nick. I think they're good.
Thank you. See, I'm fishing for a compliment here. Okay. Our fact pattern is we are talking to the board audit committee chair, Robert Sterling, the one and only Robert Sterling. So his personality indicators, this is a tricky one. Okay, get ready. Highly analytical, but results driven. Highly analytical, but results driven. Former investment banker, skeptical of quote unquote soft initiatives, wants proof of business impact, concerned about board reputation. So as I'm reading this thing that I made, there's a couple of hints here, right? Highly analytical, but results driven. Okay. Doesn't like soft initiatives. So he's probably higher up on that quadrant, right? He wants proof of business impact, and he's concerned about reputation. So this is an A and C. This is the top quadrant, right? This is task over people because he doesn't care about the soft stuff. And he wants to make sure, based on, board reputation, he doesn't want a soft initiative. He wants something that is very, wow, look at that. Look at all these A's and C's. You guys got it. I love it. Okay. So we're trying to get public leadership endorsement and $200,000 investment in our Speak Up Culture initiative with a tone at the top communication and leadership training strategy. Our current Speak Up rates are 40% below industry benchmarks. The board is concerned about the cultural risks following a recent high-profile corporate scandals in our industry or in our organization. Okay, so our traditional approach, we need leadership to publicly endorse our Speak Up program to encourage more reporting. Strong tone at the top is important for compliance culture and will help employees feel more comfortable raising concerns. This will reduce legal and regulatory risk. There's a critical sentence in here that is going to be like nails on a chalkboard for somebody of this type that we're going to address in how we attack this. So this one's a little bit more complex. You can see there's a bunch of boxes here that are highlighted. And so we're going to be kind of doing this C around the side here, okay? So we're going to be leaning into, so I'm not going to read all of these. I'll just give you like a little taste of how we can appeal to the C in Robert and appeal to the A in Robert, okay? Organizations with weak Speak Up cultures face 73% higher regulatory enforcement rates and 12.2 million of average crisis costs. Our below average benchmark indicates an elevated exposure requiring immediate board level intervention. This is a logic person, so I'm going to stay on logic here for a second before I start pulling the credibility in. Proactive issue identification through a better Speak Up program is going to reduce our crisis management costs by 82% and board emergency meeting frequency by about 2/3. Boards with demonstrable Speak Up leadership report 34% higher governance ratings from institutional investors and a 28% premium valuations for ethical leadership, which represents 45 million in market cap. As somebody who's guided boards through 6 major compliance crises, I've documented how leadership visibility in a Speak Up program can directly correlate with crisis prevention and resolution speed. And the Speak Up methodology we're talking about rolling out here has been recognized by several governance institutes as best in class. So give me the money. Okay. So again, I love this persuasion matrix because it gives us so many ideas on how we can be more resonant with folks. Because, somebody said in the chat that, everyone's kind of a mix. And so there's no silver bullet to this thing. There's no silver bullet to lock picking or cat burglary. I'm kidding. But you got to just kind of feel your way through it. But once we can kind of tune into it, once we can open our eyes to these differences and start to, at a high level, put people in these other buckets, you can start to see in real time the extent to which your approach is resonating with that person. You can get those insights, like Andrew said, from those people who might work closer with them to understand, the question I love asking is, what does this person care about and what drives this person nuts? Those 2 questions are going to give you an 80% accuracy rate on which of the 4 types they most likely are. And that can lead to how you're going to kind of sketch out that persuasion path. Okay. Let's talk about these framing tenets. So I actually want to start with this one first, Andrew. I think maybe this didn't get updated. Okay, so Andrew, you talked about the in the one that we're going to send around to you guys, there's an added slide for this this trust cycle flywheel that Andrew alluded to before. So part of being persuasive, it's not just being done at one point in time. We're trying to be persuasive continually, and we're going to try to continually. Joe is going to try to upload this slide here in a sec, but we have to maintain that. This is our level of influence in an organization is reactionary. It's not like flipping a light switch. It's something that we have to maintain. And so if you can share, Andrew, that flywheel, those bullet points that you talked about, which I've cleverly named the cycle of trust. How do we maintain that trust in the organization? How do we circle back to folks to show them the improvements, and how do we generate more improvements and more, quote unquote savings that we can continue to kind of build upon as our program grows or as our initiatives expand? Yeah.
So, you would think that during the Albemarle FCPA investigation, that our budget was just going up and up and up each year, but actually it was the budget was staying flat. And what we were able to do was to unlock more value out of our budget year on year. And so that at the aggregate level was kind of like demonstrating trust that we weren't just going to blow the budget just courtesy of a big government investigation. We were going to be very careful with our money, and we were going to demonstrate that we could do more with the same amount of investment year on year. In fact, if you took into account inflation, it was actually the real budget was actually less year on year. But our scope of program went from the traditional core areas to things like data privacy and human rights, and then all the support for our big sustainability audit processes, as well as then dealing with the big government investigations. So that's at the aggregate level. The totality of our budget, and relative to other of our functional functions, was pretty modest. And we had to talk at length about our budget before the DOJ and the SEC to demonstrate that we were getting what we needed. It wasn't that the company was pushing back on me, but it was a heavy responsibility on my part to make sure that the money that I was getting, I was putting to good use. And so take it down the next level. What does that mean? It means that you're demonstrating that value on the investment through the metrics. So once you've made that the investment, you've deployed that particular program improvement, you're going back to leadership, you're going back to the decision makers and say, this is what we did. But then on the flip side, sometimes that investment in a particular initiative, and I think about our data analytics dashboards. We've developed a whole ton of these different data analytics dashboards, and every one at a micro level, we still had to do that cost benefit analysis. Well, guess what? Some of those dashboards that we invested in, they didn't work. And so we stopped doing them. And so that, again, demonstrated trust with leaders that we weren't just going to keep plowing money into something that wasn't going to work. We were going to pull back. So making sure that you've got those performance metrics up front to show whether something is working, and not being afraid to pull the plug on something that is not working, I think is super key to that trust equation.
So something, I've been struck with or struck by from you 100 times now is you have a kind of common sense desire to improve a system, and you're open to the feedback loops on what's working and what's not working.
Right.
There's one way, apparently, according to Gordon Ramsay, to cook a beef Wellington. Okay, and he will roast you on TikTok if you cook it wrong. There's not one way to climb a mountain. There's 1,000 ways up the mountain. And so, like, this game that we're in is way closer to like climbing a mountain than it is to cooking a beef Wellington. There's not one freaking recipe on how to have an effective program. It's going to be a function of the risks you're facing, the budget you have, the maturity of your program, the maturity of your organization. There's myriad like elements that end up influencing it. And if we are too rigid in etching our plan in stone, or etching these, to use your example, etching these dashboards in stone, and we're not willing to see that feedback loop on, is this working? Well, then the odds of us like wasting budget and being bad stewards of the resources we're giving are so much higher. If the board and if leadership has a fiduciary duty to steward well the resources of the organization, and we can show in our corner of the world that we're the same way and we're exhibiting that same common sense approach, the odds of us being viewed as a quote unquote business person is so much higher. I mean, again, go back to that conversation you had with the CEO where he said, oh my gosh, you care about what I care about. Oh my gosh, you care about stewardship. I care about stewardship. Oh wow, you're a business person. You're not a bumper sticker on the car. You're an integral element to us executing our strategy. So there's just so many opportunities to do that, to solve for outcome. We're not solving for a checklist. We're solving for an outcome. Yeah,
no, it's totally right, Nick. That theme of playing to kind of like the emotions of leadership is answering the questions before they get asked of you.
Exactly.
So, for example, right, that service mentality mindset that we have to have when we're delivering on a process like a due diligence or an investigation, before they're asking the question, well, how long is this taking? We say, we understand that you may have questions about how long it's taken. We can tell you that here we actually figured out as part of our investment case to develop the metrics, so we can tell you exactly how our due diligence or our investigation or our conflicts of interest disclosure process is working in practice.
And I just think we need to recognize that the adversaries we're talking about are living in a world of risk all the time. We're all, as you get higher up in an organization, the more you realize that we're really walking backwards through life. Nobody can see the future. And so to your point, Andrew, if we can answer those questions before they're asked, or we can convey that we've been thoughtful about the initiative we're talking about, and we're communicating the tripwires we have in place, something like, hey, I want to do this initiative. It's going to cost this. I think X is going to happen. It's going to be somewhere between, Y and Z. If Y happens, then I'm going to do this. And if Z happens, then I'm going to do that. But being able to communicate that I've run the sort of mental simulation, I have some understanding on ways it can go, and I have some tripwires in place to make sure that this doesn't spiral out of control and we waste a bunch of time or cycles or resources, can do so much, to your point, to be that servant and communicate that, hey, the concerns you have, I've been thinking about them. I'm not saying they're all right, but this is kind of the framework and that just makes it so much easier to have a substantive conversation with that person, because you're giving them something to react to, not just a bunch of, questions bouncing around in their mind as to how thoughtful you've been.
Yeah, completely.
All right, we're going to dive into this this bonus section here, which I love. Okay, so here is the thing that Andrew was talking about. Thank you for round of applause for Joa. I mean, is Joa something else? He put this whole thing together. This is the cycle of trust that he was talking about. So, do you want to walk us through this? I think it's cool.
I'm having trouble seeing it. It's very small for me, Nick. So I may need some help here.
I'll walk through it, but then I'm going to get credit for coming up with this. So just know
That's
it.
Okay, good.
I'm just kidding. So this is his. This is Andrew's model. So if we start in the top right corner, like it's important to retain that trust with leadership by going back and having conversations with them and showing that the application of your common sense, smart business person approach is keeping that train on the track. So let's say you have an intensive initial investment in a process or a platform. We're then going to identify, because every complex system has a bottleneck, regardless of how optimized it is. We can continue to improve a system over and over again. We're going to identify bottlenecks and opportunities for simplification. This is going to make our process as streamlined as possible, which is ultimately going to reduce that maintenance cost. There's no way Andrew was able to drive that change forward in his, along with his team inside of his organization, while keeping budget decreasing in real terms, flat on a nominal basis, without building more value by improving the process. So if we can find opportunities to reduce those bottlenecks, streamline the process, reduce those initial, reduce the annual costs, now we have saved money that we can now redeploy for new dashboards, new tools, new headcount, whatever. And that cycle can go over and over again, because also keep in mind that stuff is changing all the time. So what worked last year might not work now. What was absolutely required 5 years ago might not be a necessary component of our program. And so if we're not continually taking fresh eyes and trying to run around this cycle of trust, we're going to often overlook things that we can delete that are not going to have a substantial or material impact on the effectiveness that we're trying to drive.
Yeah, it was super powerful to kind of like demonstrate that for each of those individual program elements that we had, got the upfront investment and then a relatively high operational cost in that second year while we were developing and building it. But then to show how that operational cost came down to free up the budget for other stuff. You squirrel it away, you get it like really running very, very efficiently, and then you move on to the next one.
But that drive for it's like the easiest way to show up as a business person is to show up with that drive for continuous improvement. The last thing we want to do is be like a government organization where we're just trying to spend our budget. And boy, if I don't spend my budget, then they're going to reduce the budget. Yeah, spend the budget, but also get more for the budget that you're getting. That's going to turn so many light bulbs on. All right. I love this concept of persuasion. So persuasion, this involves shaping the way people perceive information before they encounter a persuasive message, making them more receptive to being influenced. Persuasion is all around us. It's in movie previews. It gives us a glimpse of, oh my gosh, I'm so excited for this movie. You haven't even seen the movie yet, but the preview really stokes some emotional response from you. When you go to a nice restaurant and the host or the hostess walks you to the table, or somebody comes out and like gets your coats, that really persuades you and gets you ready to have a really nice dining experience. So there's a lot of opportunity in persuasion that's going to work with different folks, but this refers to getting people more sympathetic to your message before they encounter the message itself. Saying something like, if you're talking to a type B, say like, you are going to absolutely love this, and then you're diving into it. That is a form of persuasion. When somebody on your team introduces you to do a speech, and they start, listing off all of your accolades and really building your credibility, that's a form of persuasion. It's one of the most powerful persuasive techniques that we don't spend a lot of time thinking about. But once our hope is once we introduce this concept to you, you're going to start to see opportunities to persuade a little bit more. So how do you structure the situation or the information people experience ahead of time to direct how they process your actual persuasive attempt? There was a study done where this is in that Robert Cialdini book. I think it was in Persuasion, where they measured. It was a real estate firm, and they had two different tests that they did. One, the person answering the phone would just sort of like blind transfer to the real estate agent, and then in the other test, that person answering the phone really persuaded those callers to say, okay, I'm going to send you over to Cindy. She is an absolute expert in this region. You are going to have a phenomenal you're going to have a phenomenal experience with them. Well, in that second scenario, the close rates, the odds of converting them to an actual client was like almost an order of magnitude higher than that blind transfer. So this stuff actually works. So it's really all about setting the stage to shape people's motivations and attitudes, so that when you're making your pitch, their guard is down and they're looking for the things that you want them to look for. So listen to this. You're going to love this. Like I said, speaker introductions, movie previews. What are your thoughts on this persuasion concept, Andrew?
Nick, I think that this is one of the most important slides in the whole deck. I cannot emphasize its importance because it all ties to your risk assessment and your planning process. Right. If you're going up to the management and the board with a surprise budget ask, then something has gone awry, right? It really, if you've done your risk assessment and then you've figured out how you are managing your risk in your controls and the continuous improvement that's in your planning, then what you have hopefully done is over a period of time is sowed the seeds of expectation at some point a budget ask is going to be coming. So I got an example of that 2 or 3 years ago, Albemarle, world's largest lithium producer in the battery materials supply chain, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act was being talked about as a risk, right? So we saw that and it was on our risk radar. And so the initial thing was about educating members of our procurement, our leadership team, and the board about what this new law was going to be, which is effectively at the risk of impounding products at the US border if they were suspected of containing products made with forced labor. So we basically kind of set the scene up through that training and education. And then I went back to them about 6 months later and said, okay, we've now figured out what our process is. And guess what? We think that battery materials are going to be at the higher end of the risk of being detained by US Customs Border Protection. So we do need to be making more investment. And we are now working on a technical solution. And I'm going to come back with you with an update on what that. So I had like 2 or 3 touch points with management on that particular emerging risk before I then put in that budget ask. So it wasn't a surprise that they were being persuaded to that budget ask before it actually happened.
It's just so powerful. I mean, I think when we turn on this, when we start to exercise this persuasion muscle, I mean, I just love the human mind. I've referred to it as this goal seek mechanism. It's like when we feed ourselves new perspectives, we automatically start to see those all around us. And there's so many opportunities for persuasion. And that is like such a point of leverage in the influence that we're trying to drive. There's opportunities for it everywhere. And our ability to, again, see around the curve and not, it's like, our guardian functions will always stay in reactionary mode until we are able to like lift our heads up from the desk and look into the future a little bit. And so if down the road we want to have that budget conversation, well, we got to start planting those seeds now, Yep. Let's dive into this one. We've talked about this kind of like implicitly throughout the entire conversation. I think you should always lean into this conservatism. So in accounting, conservatism dictates that a company should factor in the worst case scenario of a firm's financial future. This builds a lot of credibility. The worst thing I can do is go to my board and say, here's what I'm expecting. And they think like it's a ridiculous, overly aggressive, claim of the future. I would much rather, like I said, have them think it's really a lot more than this. I'll tell you guys a quick story. I'll drop these in here in case you don't want to listen to the story. But I did a return on integrity session with a client, and I actually got to present it to the board. Okay. And I was like a little nervous about it because I was like, we did this whole ROI calculation. We built this really compelling case for a couple of new tools that they needed. I was trusted enough to like come in and give this presentation to the board. And at the end of the presentation, the chairman came up to me and he said, it's probably a much higher ROI than that. And I was like inside, like, oh yes, that's exactly what I wanted him to think. I wanted him to think that, because if he can accept what I'm saying, like he's never going to say that. He's never going to say, oh, it's probably higher than that if he hasn't like eaten it and digested it. So if I can make a compelling case that's overly conservative and they think that it's higher than that, who's more influential on you than yourself? You know what I'm saying? So if we try to pull too much of that into our conversation and they start to get overly skeptical of it, well, then our our persuasion quotient, so to speak, kind of falls through the floor. So showing caution, opting for solutions that reflect less favorable outcomes on the bottom line. These are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about. So again, if you think back to one of the case studies we did earlier, we said, Gallup and Workday studies show it costs 50% to 200% of someone's salary to replace them. A more conservative approach would be go at the low end of that. A super conservative approach is like, let's go below that. Let's cut that bottom end in half. If you have two solutions to choose from, always choose and present the number that yields the inferior results. That's what should be selected. Let them pull you up to the other option. Always show a bias toward conservatism in your assumptions. It's just never going to steer you wrong. It's the fastest way for someone to dismiss out of hand what your proposal is. Oh, we might have a little issue. So jump in. Are you there, Andrew? Okay, we got a little.
Oh, it paused just a little bit there.
All good. Yeah. Anything to add on conservatism, or how have you employed this when talking with executives, things like that?
Yeah, I always applied that principle of conservatism. It goes back to that principle of trust. It's like not kind of going too far and promising what you think that you can deliver. So I completely agree with this.
Yeah. All right, let's jump to the next one, the anchoring effect. So this one is extremely powerful. We as ethics and compliance or HR folks who need the buy-in of the human beings in our organization, we need the participation of all the stakeholders in our organization in order to do our main job, which is what? Crowdsourcing risk intelligence, helping to provide insights back to those points of risk to help our organization see around the curve, improve the quality by de-risking the organization. That means it's incumbent on us to be behavioral science experts. We need to understand how human beings work. And there's all these logical fallacies that are all wired into our DNA and wired into our brains that we can take advantage of, not for nefarious purposes, but to be more influential and to employ the same tactics that all the marketers and all the other departments that are, pushing their agendas forward are utilizing. So the anchoring effect is a cognitive bias that influences decisions based on initial reference points. You got to leverage it. There's a cool study about the anchoring effect, which I'll run through real quick. They took a bunch of folks and they had them guess what the value of a mug was. This is going to be like approximately right. Okay. What's the value of the mug? That was the control group. Then they got another group of folks that said, hey, write out your social security number. And then they asked them what the value of the mug was. And what was interesting is that the people whose social security numbers were like started with a 6, a 7, an 8, or a 9, they disproportionately valued that mug as twice or 3 times more valuable than those who had 0, 1, 2, or 3 as their as the starting figure in their social security number. So this anchoring effect refers to our tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information that we're offered. So once an anchor is set, people make insufficient adjustments, right? Because we're all kind of subject to these cognitive loads, and we're all subject to these cognitive biases that we're not tuned into on a moment by moment basis. Once this is set, we make insufficient adjustments from that anchor when evaluating subsequent information. So your anchors can be set by completely random or irrelevant numbers, yet still have that impact. Going back to that study I just talked about, where people's random social security number had an undue influence on how they valued a mug. So people tend to underestimate the extent to which their decisions are influenced by these anchors. So you kind of, and again, these things are so powerful when you start to kind of mix them together. So maybe there is some alchemy in this. I don't know. So here's a great way to really leverage that anchoring effect. Me coming to you and saying, I need $100,000 more budget sounds a lot different than me saying, hey, I'm not coming and asking for $1 million, which I might ask for down, a couple years from now. Right now, I'm only asking for 100,000. That second one is way more persuasive. It's way more impactful, and it helps put the $100,000 in the right perspective. Because in the context of any organization, $100,000 is not going to put them under. Okay, what do you think about anchoring? You kind of alluded. It's very closely related to the persuasion thing.
It is. The only thing I would add is that if we come into kind of like things like text selection, then when you're running a competitive sourcing process, then having high bids come in is not necessarily a bad thing, because you can actually show the full range of the bids. And if your selected bid that you want is kind of like in that sweet spot, but there's some way more expensive numbers out there, it's that psychological impact of, yes, you're on the right path. We not necessarily need to have the cheapest option, but you're right in the middle, high quality, but you're not going for the crazy expensive solution out there. It's including those in your materials as an assurance and rigor of your selection process, but also that psychological effect of, yes, we agree, go with that middle number is super helpful.
Yeah, and like not everybody knows the research that you've done, and not everybody knows how much things cost. Feel smaller. You know what I mean? For some reason, I live in the 50s. I think everything should cost like $70 or something. Okay. This anchoring actively adjust and maximize your influence. Try this week. There's going to be an opportunity for you to do anchoring this week. You can use it outside of work. Even start playing around with these things and start to see how your influence, which you're born with, which we all have. Can you try to advance the slides? I'm having some trouble in my console here, Andrew.
Here we go. That, you're cutting out a little bit, Nick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think you're back now, though. You're all good.
Okay, very good. Okay, so let's talk about the rule of three. So there was a famous Harvard study about this. This is based. This has influenced so many, menus and things like that across the board. The rule of three allows you to offer three different choices that can be perceived as an optimal assortment and strikes the right balance between the variety and cognitive load. Coming to someone with one option versus coming to them with a few options, the latter gives us a lot more opportunity to get something unstuck. Okay, so offering too many choices can lead to this analysis paralysis. There was a really cool study in 2000 about this. So the underlying principle for the rule of three is the Goldilocks principle from this same author 10 years later. So consumers prefer a moderate number of choices, not too many and not too few. So limiting the number of choices helps reduce this cognitive load. We can't pick between 50 things. We want to make it easy for someone to give us a decision that we want them to give us. We don't want to overload them with too much. Again, part of our job to be a servant and to create the risk profile and the risk stance for the organization that is necessary is navigating and being, a Sherpa, so to speak, as we climb this mountain of risk. So when we can reduce this cognitive load, but also provide some options, it helps to kind of frame it out and helps to drive a decision faster. So there's also kind of a rule of three, trick, which I'll talk about in a second. But a great application of the rule of three, which kind of incorporates a couple of the other things we've talked about, is to say, we don't need a Lamborghini style program. We probably shouldn't have a bicycle style program. We need a nice kind of a medium-sized sedan style program. That helps to kind of frame out what you're actually asking for. Hey, in order to achieve that, I've looked at three different options. Here's the kind of Cadillac, here is the Honda, and here is the Datsun, which they don't even make anymore, okay? The decoy effect is like a black belt version of the rule of three, to present three options, but really only present two, because no one's going to buy that Lamborghini, right? So introducing a third asymmetrically dominated option, a decoy, can influence the preference toward one of the other two options. So if you really want that Honda, then maybe you're going to talk about a Cadillac and you're going to talk about a Lamborghini, right? So introduce some of those decoys in your rule of three to reduce the cognitive load and help steer that person toward the thing that makes most sense. All right. So what's great about the decoy and what's great about the rule of three is there's a lot of power in, there's this famous book called Getting to Know, and people are so much more comfortable saying no than they are to saying yes. So when we can give them things to say no to, our adversaries feel a lot more control in the situation, and they feel a lot more part of it. They feel like they have kind of crafted the ultimate solution to a greater degree. Do you have any tips on the rule of three here?
Nick, I think it just builds on what I was saying earlier on that competitive sourcing example. It's kind of like a version of the rule of three, where you've got 3 bids that come in, 4 bids that come in, and you got that sweet spot. And psychologically, I think it helps the fact that you had got like more expensive ones that the decision makers are then discounting.
That's right. Okay, 131 framework. We got a couple of minutes left. 9,000 emojis. That's a new record for me. Okay. The 131 framework is a simple way to summarize a situation and drive toward executive decision. There's an additional hack I'm going to try to incorporate here. If you have a quick sec, or if we have time. One is we're going to summarize one problem. Our problem is X. Show 3 different options and solutions. Again, we're building on the rule of 3. All of these framing tenets really are related, and they're different sort of facets of the same shape. So we're going to say, here's our problem. We can do A, we can do B, we can do C. My recommendation is B, whatever it is, okay? Along with your rationale. So again, I'm making the problem very clear. I'm giving a couple of options, and I'm saying, as the trusted advisor that I'm trying to be, I am going to be pointing to one of those, and I'm going to say, I think we should do this one because of X, Y, and Z. Okay. What this allows. So here's a great example. Everyone's hungry. We can go out to Chinese food. We can order in pizza, or we can scrounge something together from leftovers. I think we should go order some pizza to minimize the effort and stay low key. Plus, we can stay in sweatpants and I get bloated after pizza, and we might not have enough leftovers for everyone. Okay, this is effective because it gives people something to react to. If you come to a conversation with your boss and you're saying, "I don't know what to do," or you're coming with a blank piece of paper, the odds of getting traction, i.e., the cognitive load on that boss or on that adversary, is going to be high. Let's dial that cognitive load in. Let's keep that lower and give them something to react to. Another kind of offshoot of this 131 framework is to say, this is a little bit of persuasion. It's a little bit of framing. But if, let's say, you have an issue with somebody else in your organization, you can say, hey, I need to have a conversation with you tomorrow. I want to talk about the lack of integration between our teams. So you want to kind of state that problem. And then you also want to state how you want that conversation to end. Hey, I want to talk about the lack of integration between those teams. And by the end of the conversation, I want us to agree to be more integrated. That simple thing, along with your meeting request, can do a lot to decompress that person, lower their anxiety, and also set the path or set, the destination, set the odds that you arrive at the destination you want a lot higher. Leveraging this framework, leveraging this persuasion can really do a lot. And again, these are just like little hacks. These are little hacks that you can start to incorporate as you tune into the personality types of the folks around you, as you come to those conversations with some ranges and some calculations on what might happen if this thing happens, and allows us to really, again, speak the language of the business to a greater degree. It's hard to just talk about the calculations because you're never going to come to that meeting and say, here's the number. It's always a conversation. It's always a persuasion path. It's always an attempt to get somebody onto your page. And so we hope that okay, and then this next section here, there's a bunch of data points that you can utilize. We're not going to go through all of these, but there's a bunch of data points here that you can utilize to start building up, credible assumptions behind, what your projections for the future are going to be. Cost of turnover assumptions, things like that. So I've appreciate everyone for joining today. Let's get one more round of applause for Andrew. He is the absolute man. Please be sure to follow him on LinkedIn.
You too, mate. Seriously, what a contribution to the ethics compliance community. The amount of time that you guys have put into these materials and to this is it's absolutely staggering. If we talk about ROI, this is 3 hours where everyone's effectively getting an equivalent of an MBA in ethics and compliance investment. It's incredible.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah. it just feels like this is the skill set. This is the next, belt we have to like graduate to really make this next 10 years be way different than the last 10 years. Like what got us here isn't going to get us there. We have to do things a little bit different, but thank God we have the processes in place. Thank God we have these resources like Andrew, and this community that we're all a part of to really build on each other and really build with each other and share these tactics that are going to help us get unstuck. This stuff is easy and fun. If you start opening your eyes to it, you're going to see so many opportunities all around you to just say things a little bit differently and tune into that person a little bit more and really build some trust by dialing down your own self-focus and really empathizing more with, the people that we're trying to influence. Influence is your superpower. Building influence, driving ROI, showing up like a business person is a lot easier than you think. It's just a bunch of addition and multiplication coupled with tuning into the human beings that it's our job to influence and gain their engagement in our program. So love you all. Hope you guys had a great day today. We're 1 minute over. That's pretty good. I thought we were going to run long, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, if you'd like to do a return on integrity session, those are going to be free for EthicsVerse members until the end of the quarter. So if you'd like to do one of these, or you'd like to just kind of brainstorm how to attack, the power dynamics in your organization to get the resources that are there. There's crumbs all over the table. Okay. They just got to brush a couple of crumbs off the table. But when we can grab hold of the frame, it's kind of like grabbing hold of that steering wheel, and we can exhibit the agency that we all have in us. So hope you guys enjoyed the session. Hope to see you next week for another phenomenal episode, and we'll see you then. Take care.